Chapter 834. Women with pursuits are very scary. Especially those who are ambitious, they are even scarier. Treading on a dark cloud and flying at high speed across the sky, Wuqi complained lazily to Ao Buzan and Catfish Flood Dragon, who were sitting cross-legged next to him. Ao Buzan nodded in agreement and said, "That's right, a woman like Mistress is indeed ambitious. TSK, how could she have the patience to deal with so many newly recruited soldiers?" Catfish Flood Dragon opened her mouth lazily. A few calloused fingers were dangling in the corner of her mouth, then she swallowed them down with crunching noises. She stared blankly at Wuqi and said, "What is the point of doing so many things? Having a comfortable cave and enough food is more than enough." Wuqi and Ao Buzan looked at Catfish Flood Dragon and did not say a word. Although she had stepped into the realm of Tao reasoning, she had only comprehended the heavenly Tao, and she was still muddle-headed. Eating and sleeping are all that she has, right? Sure enough, a simple life is the happiest. Shaking his head, Wuqi sighed as he looked at a row of egrets flying high in the sky in the distance. Princess Zhanglu was working very hard to train the new army of the East Sea, and was working very hard to build the brand new Directorate of Celestials of the East Sea. Lu Qingfeng was working very hard to reorganize the administrative teams of the provinces ruled by the East Sea, as well as the 300 provinces in Zhong province. He was so busy every day that his feet barely touched the ground. Yan Bugue was frantically planting spies everywhere, desperately expanding the size of the punishment court's training camps and training a large number of spies. Meanwhile, Patriarch Jiang Yun and Supremacy 3 Flame were working together to develop new pill formulas, and at the same time, they were working very hard to train the disciples of Underhand Sect. Everyone was very busy, as they had their own pursuits and goals. On the other hand, Wuqi had decided to leave all the work to Princess Zhanglu and the others, while he rode a cloud to Anhe City in Anlu County to pay a visit to Yan Dan. They're all busy, but why? Wuqi crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked lazily at the passing clouds in the sky. He already had the cultivation base of a primordial immortal, and with some careful cultivation, the realm of Tao breaking and Tao fusing was not out of his reach. Why did he have to work so hard to travel back and forth? Reverend Li Yang, who was once his enemy, could be killed with just a slap now. Why did he have to bring so many troubles to himself? After pondering for a long time, Wuqi suddenly laughed when the cloud flew into Anlu County's territory. "Don't let the tragedy of Tan Lang and Lu Xiaobai happen to the people around you, okay? Don't let the fate of your friends and family be dictated by others. Since I've stepped into the realm of primordial, why can't I go a little higher? I want to go a little higher, so high that I no longer have to fear any conspiracy, and no longer have to fear that anyone will destroy the little peace and happiness in my heart. I don't want my heart to ache again, and I don't want to shed tears for others again. Therefore, I want to go a little higher than those who can control the world with their will. This should be my pursuit now, right?" If Wuqi were alone, with the cultivation base of a primordial immortal, he could have found a quiet place to live in seclusion, and lived out his infinite life in peace. But now, he could no longer leave. There were more and more people around him, and he had so many friends and family to worry about. How could he leave? Glancing sideways at Ao Buzan, who was sneakily grabbing a heaven immortal's thigh and stuffing it into his mouth, Wuqi sighed and said, "At least, I can't let this guy be made into a storage ring again, can I? That would be a little too sad." With a bright smile on his face, Wuqi pressed down on the cloud and landed in a dense forest 100 miles away from the south gate of Anhe City. After straightening their clothes, Wuqi, Ao Buzan, and Catfish swaggered toward Anhe City. With their speed, it only took them a quarter of an hour to cover the distance of 100 miles. Along the way, they could see crisscross paths, and the crops in the fields were growing very well. Of course, in a place like Panga Continent, it was difficult for the crops to grow badly. But, judging from the rice seedlings that were planted neatly by Chi-Chi, it could be seen that the elite farmers had put a lot of thought into these fields. They were taking care of the fields very seriously. Only old farmers who had deep feelings for the fields would treat the crops and fields so seriously. In the fields and at the entrance of the villages, teams of young men were practicing their punches and kicks with a thunderous roar. They waved their fists like lightning and stamped their feet like thunderclaps, producing deep, muffled noises when their punches and kicks collided with each other. Each of their moves was very strict and had their own rules. Their muscles were bulging, and it was obvious that they were body cultivators. Judging from their overall strength, they were probably as strong as nascent soul cultivators. In each team of young men, there was a leader whose overall strength was far stronger than them. These leaders had a vigorous look on their faces, and the murderous aura of an army could not be concealed in their every move. On average, their cultivation base was at the level of a 36th tier heaven immortal, but a few of them were far stronger than their peers, possessing a mighty strength close to that of a 20th tier heaven immortal. Wu Qi could not help but be struck dumb. Were these the soldiers that Great Yen had trained in the past few years? Obviously, Yen Dan and others had put in a lot of effort to build such a large army in just a few years. Curiously, Wu Qi covered the entire Anlu County and the neighboring Anyi County with his divine will. There were tens of millions of well-trained young men in both counties. With a wry smile, Wu Qi shook his head and murmured to himself. It was because Wu Qi had provided enough cover for Great Yen that Yen Dan and others could expand their armies so unscrupulously. If it were any other place in Diyu, even a prefecture overseer of a first-grade province would be charged with treason if he dared to expand his army to 1 million soldiers, not to mention 2 counties with tens of millions of soldiers. In addition to these young men, many academies and schools had been built in the cities and towns of the 2 counties, which were things that Diyu did not have before. The common people on Pangu continent never learned anything like writing or history. They just followed the habits of their ancestors, following the oldest pattern of working at sunrise and resting at sunset. In Diyu, only the members of the imperial clan and the members of the influential clans could receive education in culture, history, military, government, and other aspects from an early age, and the institution responsible for their education was the Directorate of Celestials. Because of the unique status of the Directorate of Celestials in Diyu, the knowledge taught in it was not known to the common people. But in recent years, after Great Yen took control of the 2 counties, in addition to vigorously developing production and expanding the army, it had also built academies and schools to teach the common people all kinds of cultural knowledge. Wu Qi had seen some simple and honest young men designing various machines and instruments under the guidance of Great Yen's teachers in many academies, and some were learning medical science, forging, farming, astronomy, and other techniques. There was even a school set up in Anlu City to teach all kinds of cooking techniques, and there were quite a number of people who were learning cooking. Compared with the suffocating atmosphere of conservative tradition in all parts of Diyu, the 2 counties under Great Yan's rule were full of vitality, giving people a refreshing atmosphere. Wu Qi could not tell whether the changes in Anlu County and Anyi County were good or bad. It was a good thing that people's minds were open and their minds were open. But, when people's hearts were moved and their minds were open, the temptation of knowledge would increase. If the temptation became the immortality of immortals or something even more fascinating, would these people, who were as simple and honest as rocks in the mountains a few years ago, be able to resist such a temptation? When Anhi City was invaded by the forces of Tao League and Buddhist League, those cultivators had spent a great deal of effort and hundreds of years to barely make some progress here. But, when these people under Great Yan's rule had seen the culture that was completely different from that of Diyu, if a sect of cultivators suddenly came here, would these people rush to join the sect and completely abandon their identity as human beings? Wu Qi was murmuring to himself, while Ao Buzan and Catfish Flood Dragon were looking up into the sky, chewing something unknown with the smell of blood in their mouths. The 3 of them walked stealthily to the gate of Anhi City, and were naturally stopped by the soldiers of Great Yen clad in the standard armor of Diyu. More than 200 soldiers surrounded the 3 of them. Wu Qi could not help but smile bitterly. He told the officer frankly, according to the military system of Diyu, there will be no more than 100 soldiers stationed in the whole Anlu County. But, you have stationed more than 200 soldiers at the gate of Anhi City. Isn't this telling the outsiders that there is something wrong here? Wu Qi's words made the surrounding soldiers very nervous. They drew their weapons at the same time and took a big step forward subconsciously. Ao Buzan sneered, while Catfish Flood Dragon clenched her fists excitedly and said, "Brother Wuqi, can I eat them? This little leader has a strong body, and he looks very chewy." Catfish Flood Dragon's words sounded evil, and it made the surrounding soldiers' faces fall. They roared in unison and were about to attack Wuqi and his companions. Wuqi gave Catfish Flood Dragon a glare, who had drool hanging from the corner of her mouth, and said with a low sigh, "She does have a pretty face, but why is there only food in her mind?" While sighing, Wuqi pulled out the token of 9 swallows given to him by Yen Dan many years ago and threw it out. The guard caught the token with one swift motion. His body trembled, and he cried out at the top of his voice, "Stop! Stop! Your Excellency, you are..." After making a scene at the city gate for a while, Wuqi finally met Yen Dan, Yen Qijuan, his father, Mod, Sun Kuang, Su Qin, Han Fei, Jing Ku, Yu Yi, Fan Yuqi, Qin Wuyang, and a group of Great Yen's courtiers in the city lord mansion of Anhe City, which was now the imperial palace of Great Yen. After a few years, the people of Great Yen treated Wuqi very warmly. During this period of time, Princess Zhanglu had been traveling around with Wuqi, and they were not in Anle County. As a result, Yen Dan and the others had almost cut off all contact with the outside world, and could not receive any information from the outside world. When he suddenly saw Wuqi come to visit, Yen Dan asked hastily, "Wuqi, how are you doing? Where is Zixian? Why didn't she come with you?" With a smile on his face, Wuqi exchanged a few words with Yen Dan and the others. After that, he went straight to the point and told them the purpose of his visit. "Send invitations to the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties in the name of Great Yen. There are some things that I need to tell them frankly." Rubbing his fingers, Wuqi looked at Yen Dan and said, "Frankly speaking, I'm short of manpower now. Each of the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties is a hero, and I want them to work for me. I'm too lazy to go around and capture them. So, Your Majesty, please use the invitations to trick them into coming here." Yen Dan, Yen Qijuan, and the others were struck dumb. Were they hallucinating? Wuqi wanted the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties to work for him. How was that even possible? Chapter 835. Wuqi had blatantly told everyone that he was going to subdue the emperors and courtiers of the 5 dynasties. A dead silence reigned the great hall. Apart from Ao Buzan, who did not seem to care much, and the heartless Catfish Flood Dragon, all the emperors and courtiers of Great Yen were staring blankly at Wuqi, trying to figure out the meaning of his words. If he wanted to subdue the emperors and courtiers of the 5 dynasties, what would happen to the emperor and courtiers of Great Yen, whose overall strength was on par with the other 5 dynasties, be placed in the hands of Wuqi? Since Wuqi had the overall strength to subdue the emperors and courtiers of the 5 dynasties, didn't that mean that Wuqi could also easily subdue Great Yen? What was he implying? Or, was Wuqi trying to convey some kind of message to them through his words? Both Yen Dan and Yen Qijuan had their brows knitted tightly together. Yen Dan's expression looked slightly better, but Yen Qijuan's face was twisted into a frown. He stared at Wuqi, his eyes filled with doubt and hesitation. He did not conceal his doubts about Wuqi's intentions. His expression and gaze were asking Wuqi frankly, "Is this son-in-law of yours thinking about the throne of Great Yen? This father-in-law of mine is in the prime of his life, and yet you're coveting the throne of Great Yen at such a young age? Don't you think you have some wild ambitions?" Qin Wuyang rose to his feet, pointed his finger at Wuqi, and cried out, "Wuqi, what makes you think you can subdue the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties?" Looking at Qin Wuyang, whose hair was standing on end, Wuqi turned to look at the other courtiers of Great Yen, and could not help but laugh. Fiddling with the teacup served by a maidservant and taking a sip of the fragrant tea, Wuqi said coolly, "In the last 2 years, I've done something for the human emperor of Diyu. Now, my title is the King of East Sea of Diyu, and I have 30 provinces as my fief. In addition, the Central Prefecture Marquis Bo Zhongfu has already led the entire Bo clan to seek refuge with me. Right now, the Bo clan is my vassal clan, so the Central Prefecture's 300 prefectures are also considered my territory. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Wuqi patted the ground beside him and said expressionlessly, to be exact, Anlo County and Ani County are also my territories now. General Qin, how do you think I can subdue the emperors and ministers of the 5 states? The atmosphere in the hall was getting more and more strange. When Wuqi told them that his current title was Diyu, King of East Sea, and that he now had 30 provinces as his fief, and that Bo Zhongfu, who ruled over 300 provinces in Zhong province, had come to his side, the faces of the emperor and ministers of Great Yan, including Yan Dan, were filled with a variety of expressions. Yan Dan was overjoyed. Yan Qijuan's expression changed very quickly. Mod and Sun Kuang's expressions remained unchanged. Han Fei stared blankly at the ceiling, as if he had not figured out what Wuqi had just said. He narrowed his eyes, his pupils darting quickly. At this moment, he looked like an old fox. Among the other ministers of Great Yan, Gao Jianli was stroking the musical instrument placed on his knee with a pair of misty eyes, as if he was immersed in the music. Tian Guang straightened his back, his eyes darting back and forth between Yan Dan's face. His expression did not change. Jing Ke squinted at Ao Buzan and Catfish Flood Dragon, who were sitting next to Wuqi. He was not interested in the affairs of the state, but he was curious about the tremendous pressure brought to him by Ao Buzan and Catfish Flood Dragon. Yui sat cross-legged with both hands placed on his knees. Green veins were bulging on the back of his hands, and a murderous aura was vaguely lingering around him. No one knew what he was thinking, but his hair was fluttering even though there was no wind. Vaguely, the rumbling of weapons could be heard coming from his hair. Among all the people present, Qin Wuyang was the one who made the biggest move. Almost at the moment when Wuqi mentioned his current title of nobility in Diyu and the territory he owned, Qin Wuyang leaped up to a height of 30 feet. He pointed his finger at Wuqi and snapped, Prince of Tianyun, do you still remember that you are a minister of Great Yan? Qin Wuyang's rebuke made the faces of many people in the Great Hall change once again. Apart from Ao Buzan, whose mind was wandering, and Catfish Flood Dragon, whose eyes were staring blankly, all the others had their eyes fixed on Wuqi. Wuqi looked at Qin Wuyang as if nothing had happened, nodded slowly and said, I remember, of course I remember. I'm not only a minister of Great Yan, but also the grandson-in-law of His Majesty, the son-in-law of the Crown Prince, and the husband of Princess Xianglu. We haven't held a formal wedding yet, but if necessary, we can hold it at any time. Qin Wuyang laughed, twitching the corner of his mouth and saying with a somewhat evil smile, since you still admit that you are a minister of Great Yan, whether you are the king of East Sea of Diyu or some other high-ranking official, shouldn't the territories under your rule belong to Great Yan? Almost at the same time, everyone in the Great Hall gasped. Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan narrowed their eyes, while the rest of the people moved their bodies subconsciously. Even Han Fei, who had been the calmest and even a little stiff, could not help but turn to look at Wuqi. Wuqi spread his arms indifferently, stared at Qin Wuyang, and said with a faint smile on his face, since General Qin has said so, what's the harm in giving these 30 provinces to Great Yan? Upon hearing Wuqi's words, everyone immediately drew in a heavy breath, except for Ao Buzan, whose mind was wandering, and Catfish Flood Dragon, who subconsciously took out a Heaven Immortal's thigh and stuffed it into her mouth, chewing it slowly as a snack. Crunch! Catfish Flood Dragon's teeth crushed the bone of the thigh, and her sharp teeth made a few old tendons on the thigh creak. Half of the foot was still hanging near her mouth. The ferocious scene made everyone, including Yan Dan, look a little strange. They stared at Catfish Flood Dragon as if they were looking at a ghost. Only then did Yan Dan and the others suddenly realize that Wuqi did not have a tall and burly man like Ao Buzan, and a petite little girl like Catfish Flood Dragon who ate a human's thigh as dry food. Wuqi smiled faintly, then pointed at Catfish Flood Dragon and said, Your Majesty, Crown Prince, and all the ministers and dukes, this is an old acquaintance of yours, Catfish Flood Dragon, the leader of the water monsters in Longyuan River's Lake of Four Waters. Recently, her cultivation base has improved a little, and that's why she has transformed into a human form. But, this habit of eating humans can't be changed in a short period of time, so just pretend that you never saw it. After comforting Yan Dan and the others, who were a little surprised, Wu Qi smiled and said to Qin Wuyang, the 30 provinces under the rule of the East Sea Province, and the 300 provinces under the rule of Zhong Province, can all be given to Great Yan. But, if I do that, Great Yan will have to help me deal with those enemies. After all, human Emperor De Yu will not confer me a high position for no reason. I've offended a lot of people for the sake of the King of East Sea. Qin Wuyang smiled faintly and said calmly, please tell me in detail, Prince Tianyun. I want to know how many people you have offended. Wu Qi also smiled faintly and said calmly, well, I've just killed 3 primordial immortals of the Celestial Court, killed 3 Buddhas of the Buddhist League, and killed a primordial immortal from the Fiend Realm. I've also severely wounded and robbed Buddha Futu, who was the incarnation of Lord Buddha Amitabha's precious treasure. Also, I've destroyed a sentry post of the Celestial Court and killed tens of thousands of gold immortals from the Celestial Court. Slowly, he told them all the things he had done and the people he had offended in the past 2 years. In fact, Wu Qi told them all the people he had killed, wounded, robbed, and provoked. The faces of Yan Dan and the others changed dramatically. They no longer cared about Catfish Flood Dragon, who was munching on a human leg as a snack. All of them stared blankly at Wu Qi, unable to digest the information contained in his words for a long time. Qin Wuyang's face turned deathly pale. He stared blankly at Wu Qi while his mind was filled with a loud rumbling noise. When he heard Wu Qi say that he had acquired such a large fief, he just wanted to get some benefits from Wu Qi. But, what Wu Qi said was too shocking. He could actually kill a primordial immortal. A primordial immortal? What kind of existence was that? Now, Great Yan did not even have a single gold immortal, and the ones with the highest cultivation base were the few members of Great Yan's imperial clan who had switched to practicing the cultivation technique of the human race. Among the ministers who practiced the cultivation technique of immortals, only Su Qin had the highest cultivation base, and that was the immortal energy obtained out of thin air by Princess Zhang Li's blood sacrifice. For Great Yan, which did not even have a single gold immortal, it was ridiculous and frightening that Wu Qi suddenly told them that he had killed a few primordial immortals. Trembling, Qin Wuyang pointed a finger at Wu Qi and laughed dryly. Prince of Tianyun, you really know how to joke. Looking at Qin Wuyang, Wu Qi smiled faintly and said, the human emperor will not joke with titles and territories. With a flick of his sleeve, a plume of purple smoke sprayed out, and the black stone table in front of Wu Qi suddenly turned into a slab of pork. It was dripping with blood, as if it had just been cut from a pig's body, a fresh piece of pork. But, no piece of pork could turn into 2 sections with clouds on top and a foothold on the bottom. Just like the time when Wu Qi was on the grassland, the hunchback old man had turned the grass on the ground into cabbages, and Wu Qi had turned the stone table into a slab of fresh pork. Gold immortals could also turn stone into gold, but only primordial immortals had the ability to fundamentally transform matter. Qin Wuyang's mouth fell open, and the crowd heard a crisp crack coming from his jaw. He had exerted too much force, and his jaw was dislocated. Everyone, including Yan Dan, stared blankly at the slab of pork standing in front of Wu Qi, and gasped at the same time. It had been a long time since they came to Panga continent, and the various spies Great Yan had sent out had come into contact with those itinerant cultivators who were hiding here and there, so they had heard countless rumors about gold immortals and primordial immortals. The fact that Wu Qi had turned a stone into a slab of pork seemed to be the means of a primordial immortal. Staring fixedly at the slab of pork in front of Wu Qi, Mod fished out a polished metal component from under his sleeve and handed it to Wu Qi. Wu Qi nodded to Mod with a smile, then casually clapped his hand. Immediately, the material of the metal component changed from an alloy of 36 rare metals to a radish, and it was a big red radish with juice dripping down from its surface. The great hall fell into a dead silence once again. The crowd stared at the big radish in Mod's hand for a long time. Trembling, Yan Qijuan raised his hand and pointed at a beautiful maidservant standing in a corner of the great hall. Wu Qi gave the maidservant a look. He pondered for a brief moment, then casually pointed a finger out with a bright light. Suddenly, the maidservant's clothes fell off. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared blankly at the unimaginable changes happening to the maid's body. The maidservant bowed her head and stared blankly at the terrible transformation. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the former maidservant, who had turned into a real man, touched the strange thing on her lower body, rolled her eyes, and fainted. Yen Dan opened his mouth and swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Then, he issued an edict. Send invitations to the emperors of the 5 dynasties, and invite them to Anhui city. After a brief pause, Yen Dan laughed dryly and said, the throne of Great Yen will be handed over to Princess Zhangluo, and I, Qijuan, will be the old great emperor. The great hall fell into a dead silence. No one objected to Yen Dan's decree. Chapter 836. Although the cultivation bases of Yen Dan and others had become too weak to be mentioned in Wu Qi's eyes, their ability to manage state affairs was not to be underestimated. In just a few years, they had built medium-sized long-distance teleportation formations between the territories of the 6 states, as well as small-scale teleportation formations that could transport small items. The invitations sent by Yen Dan to the emperors of the 5 states were sent through small-scale teleportation formations called minor universal teleportation formations. The excuse was that Great Yen had obtained important information about Diyu, and they hoped that the emperors would gather together to discuss countermeasures. A quarter of an hour later, the teleportation formation in the secret chamber in the backyard of the city lord mansion flickered, and the emperors of the 5 states arrived at Anhui city with a group of their close courtiers and guards. There was an unconcealable weariness on the faces of the emperors and courtiers, while Zhao Sheng and Wei Wuji were wounded. Although they were wearing fragrant sachets, they could not hide the faint smell of blood on their bodies. Seeing the emperors and courtiers of the 5 states in such a state, Yen Dan could not help but be stunned. He bowed to Zhao Sheng and asked in surprise, Your Majesties, why are you in such a state? Could it be that you have been discovered by Diyu's army? Zhao Sheng and Wei Wuji exchanged a glance and shook their heads at the same time. They sighed and told him what had happened to them. Zhao Sheng was wounded by an immortal from the Fiend League who was passing by. The immortal was an itinerant immortal who had fled in a panic after his nest was wiped out by Great Yu's imperial army. By accident, he ran into the territory developed by Zhao State, where he found an army being trained by Zhao State. The army was practicing a mystic art of refining immortal weapons obtained by Zhao State. When cultivated to a certain level, it could turn a man into a formidable being like a flying yiksha. The fiend immortal was overjoyed at the sight of the prey, and he slaughtered this army of more than 30,000 soldiers. He took their corpses and refined them into his fiend weapon, and Zhao Sheng led the civil and military officials of Great Zhao to fight against him. After a great battle, the fiend immortal was killed, and Zhao Sheng and many of his officials were injured. As for Wei Wuji, he suffered an unexpected disaster. A demon with the bloodline of Lao Ai had somehow run into the territory developed by Great Wei to escape the pursuit of Diyu's army. The army of the Wei kingdom attacked this unlucky demon. As a result, the soldiers of the Wei kingdom suffered heavy casualties, and Wei Wuji and a group of courtiers also suffered serious injuries. It was one thing to be injured by a fiendish immortal, but to be injured by a demon that was running around in a panic, it was no wonder that Wei Wuji's expression was particularly ugly. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states were speechless. They exchanged glances. Except for Yen Dan, who looked the best, the others all looked a little strange. Zhao Sheng and Wei Wuji were wounded, but Ying Zheng, Chu Ping, and Tian Wen, who were not injured, all looked a little weak, especially Chu Ping, who was an expert in the art of ghosts and deities. His skin had turned black and his eyes were sunken, making him look no different from a ghost. Clearly, it was a sign of excessive energy consumption. Compared with Yen Dan's pale face, red lips, and bright eyes, the other emperors looked no different from refugees. Yen Dan knew that he had taken over Anhui County and Anhui County directly from Wu Qi as the foundation for his development, while the other emperors had to start from scratch and establish a foundation on Pangu continent. Judging from the faces of the emperors and courtiers of the 5 states today, Pangu continent was not a good place to mess around. Ying Zheng and the others were lucky that they were not wiped out by the army of Diyu as itinerant cultivators. Clearing his throat, Yen Dan did not know what to say. He brought the emperors and courtiers of the 5 states to a newly built underground hall under the city lord mansion. In a magnificently decorated great hall, Wu Qi was standing with his hands clasped behind his back next to a pillar with a coiling dragon, carefully admiring the exquisite dragon scales carved on the gilded pillar. When the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states entered the hall, the others looked fine, but Xiang Yu's expression changed dramatically when he saw Wu Qi. Almost subconsciously, he gripped the hilt of his sword. Blue veins popped up on the back of his hand, and it took him a great deal of effort to restrain the urge to draw the sword and slash at Wu Qi. Everyone else was looking at him. 90% of their eyes were filled with malice, and some had their facial muscles twitching, almost bursting into laughter. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xiang Yu slowly let go of the hilt. He nodded to Wu Qi and said in a steady voice, "Long time no see, Prince of Tianyun, Wu Qi. You seem to be very different from the last time we met." Wu Qi turned to look at Xiang Yu, nodded slightly, and said with a smile, "Xiang Yu, the hegemon king of Western Chu, you are very different too. If you draw your sword and kill me in front of so many people, I will really look down on you." "Very good, very good. You are also very different from the last time we met." After a moment of silence, Xiang Yu said with a cold grin, "When we parted last time, I told you that if you dare to appear in front of me." Wu Qi waved his hand and said coolly, "Cut the crap. You can't kill me now. But if you want to make things difficult for me because of a woman, I don't mind wiping you and your Xiang clan out of existence." Hearing Wu Qi's words, Chu Ping, who had been standing silently for a long time, cleared his throat and said, "Prince of Tianyun, don't you think you've gone too far? No matter what, Xiang Yu is a subject of Great Chu, and the 6 states are allies now. Don't you disappoint the emperor and subjects of Great Chu by saying that?" Wu Qi just shook his head. He gave Chu Ping an apologetic smile, then pointed at 3 people and said, "Yu Tan, Yu Ji, Yu Yao, the 3 of you, step forward. I only have one question for you. Which son of King Yangshan is the one who ordered you to do this? Is it Ji Dai, Ji Yu, Ji Ao, or Ji Lan? You are the pawns they use to control the 6 states, aren't you?" Yu Tan and the other 2 girls, whose names were pointed out by Wu Qi, turned pale and took a few steps back in fear. "How did you know all this?" Yu Ji cried out in a hoarse voice. You, don't tell me it's true that someone has found a way to lift the black celestial forbidden curse?" Without saying a word, Yu Tan pulled out a long-handled machete and swung it backhandedly at Wu Qi's neck. The blade flashed like a waterfall, reflecting the gleam of the pearls in the great hall. Before Huang Xia, who was standing next to Yu Tan, could stop her, Yu Tan had already struck Wu Qi's neck with the machete. The emperors and courtiers of the 5 states cried out in alarm at the same time, but Yen Dan and the other emperors and courtiers of Great Yen did not even bat an eyelid. A crisp sound rang out. There was not even a white mark on Wu Qi's neck, but Yu Tan's machete had shattered into countless pieces of iron that flew in all directions. Yu Tan hissed furiously. Her strong and vigorous body leaped forward, her right hand clenched into a fist and punched silently at Wu Qi's Adam's apple like a viper coming out of its cave. Wu Qi stood where he was, motionless. Yu Tan's fist landed on Wu Qi's neck and produced another muffled thud. Wu Qi's eyelids did not even twitch, while Yu Tan held her right fist and screamed miserably. She felt as if she had punched an iron stake, which was many times harder than an iron stake. The bones of her wrist and arm were shattered, and the severe pain made her face turn pale. Her mind went blank, and she could no longer remember anything. Wu Qi sighed softly, then turned to Huang Xia and said with a strange smile, "Duke of Chunshen, I can't believe that the woman next to you has the cultivation base of a gold immortal. I really have no idea how you have endured her all these years." Huang Xia's face fell abruptly. He jerked his head up, glared at Yu Tan, and roared furiously, "Yuan, is what Prince of Tianyun said true?" Yu Tan just kept hugging her wrist and gasping for air, not even looking at Huang Xia. Yu Yao, who had been standing next to Ying Zheng, gave a clear cry. With a wave of her right hand, dozens of green jade slips flew out and flew toward Wuqi, following the number of stars in the sky. Each jade slip was accompanied by a wisp of cloud and smoke, from which drops of dew gradually sprayed out. As the dew surged, a gust of strong wind rushed out, and amidst the wind were large patches of earthy yellow particles. The energies of earth, water, fire, and wind rubbed against each other, stirring up faint thunderclaps and causing a sharp pain to the eardrums of everyone in the great hall. Seeing that Yu Yao was about to strike, Yingzheng subconsciously reached out and grabbed her shoulder. A great plume of black water vapor sprayed out from behind him, amidst which, the shadows of 9 flood dragons emerged rapidly. "What are you doing, my queen?" Yingzheng snapped. "What is it that you can't talk about?" Yu Yao gave a cold snort and let Yingzheng's palm grab her shoulder. She twisted her body, and Yingzheng felt that what he grabbed was not the smooth and delicate body of the usual girl, but the body of a tough and slippery python with great strength. A powerful force bounced back, knocking Yingzheng's fingers back a few feet high. Yu Yao gave a light cry, and the jade slips had surrounded Wuqi, forming a formation that trapped Wuqi in it. A sinister, cold laugh rang out. With a twist of her body, she grabbed the hilt of the sword hanging on his waist with her little hand and pulled it out. Like a ghost, she left several dozens of afterimages in the air and thrust a several tens of feet long sword beam towards Wuqi's heart. The jade slips that trapped Wuqi opened up a gap just in time, allowing Yuji to rush into the formation. At the same time, the surrounding energies of earth, water, fire, and wind were wrapped around the sword, condensing into a blinding halo at the tip of the sword that looked like a shooting star, thrusting straight towards Wuqi's heart. Yuji chuckled and said, "Knowing too much will cost you your life. Wuqi, you little punk, you have taken a great advantage of me, and that is a crime worthy of death." Together, Yu Yao and Yuji had easily set up a deadly trap that would surely kill Wuqi. Both girls had a complacent smile on their faces, thinking that Wuqi would definitely die. Only Yu Tan, who had just suffered a bitter defeat from Wuqi, cried out hoarsely, "Sisters, be careful. This man's cultivation base is unfathomable." Before her voice could fade away, the sword in Yuji's hand had already stabbed into Wuqi's heart. But, no matter how hard she tried, the sword just could not stab into Wuqi's body. Wuqi casually flicked his finger out, and the sword in Yuji's hand exploded into fine metal powder. After that, he flicked his sleeve, and the formation deployed by Yu Yao was smashed into pieces like a castle built by a child with pieces of paper. Yu Yao, Yuji, and Yu Tan cried out in alarm at the same time. They exchanged a look of horror, then their bodies glowed with a jade-colored gleam at the same time. Leaping into 1,000 feet long beam of light, they were about to flee. But, before they could fly more than 10 feet into the sky, Catfish Flood Dragon had already flown over their heads with a huge hammer on her shoulder. Catfish Flood Dragon did not swing the hammer randomly, but just gently placed her hammer on the girls' heads. The 3 poor girls had transformed into beams of light and fled at top speed, but ended up bumping into Catfish Flood Dragon's hammer. 3 loud clangs rang out, and the 3 girls fell to the ground with their eyes rolled back. Gradually, 3 green bumps the size of fists emerged on their foreheads. The collision was so fierce that the 3 women almost broke their necks. Wuqi laughed coldly. Looking at Yingzheng, Huang Xie, and Xiang Yu, who had an unsightly expression on their faces, he snorted coldly and said, "Now, we can talk in peace. There are some things that I need to ask for your opinions on." With a flick of his sleeve, the 3 girls were rolled up by a gust of strong wind and hovered uncontrollably in the air, surrounded by countless restrictive spells that imprisoned them. The emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties exchanged glances, then walked into the great hall and took their seats. Chapter 837. The atmosphere in the great hall was extremely strange. The 3 women were hovering in midair, surrounded by dozens of ribbons of light formed by countless black divine runes, imprisoning them in midair and preventing them from moving. These powerful divine runes had the effect of paralyzing and freezing the soul. Not only could the 3 women not move, they could not hear, see, speak, or think. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states took their seats. The faces of the emperors and courtiers of Great Wei, Great Zhao, and Great Qi remained unchanged, but the faces of the people of Daqin and Great Chu were unsightly. From time to time, they glanced at the three women who were imprisoned in midair, then stole glances at their emperors, wanting to see how they would deal with the matter. Yan Dan, Yan Qijuan, and the other emperors and courtiers of Great Yan had taken their seats on the left and right sides of the Great Hall. Only Wu Qi sat cross-legged on a 6-feet-high 3-layered wooden platform in the center of the Great Hall, looking down at the crowd. The eyes of the emperors and courtiers of the 5 states flickered. They seemed to understand something from Wu Qi's seat. Clapping his hands lightly, Wu Qi looked at the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states and said coolly, "The first thing I want to tell you is that the throne of Emperor Yan has been passed to Great Yan's Princess Xianglu, Ji Zixuan. The former Emperor Dan and Crown Prince Yan Qijuan will share the throne." Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan smiled and nodded at the emperors and courtiers of the 5 states, who had complicated expressions on their faces. No one said a word. They all knew that the main event was yet to come, and the change of power in Great Yan was clearly just the prelude. Their attention was all on Wu Qi. Clearly, the root of everything was Wu Qi, who was able to make Yan Dan hand over the throne and let his granddaughter inherit the throne. Glancing at the emperors and courtiers of the 5 states who were listening attentively to him, Wu Qi gave Xiang Yu a look, who sat like a mountain, and said in a deep voice, "The second thing is that Wu Qi wants to ask you. It seems that it is not easy to develop and grow Pangu continent, right? All of you cultivate the immortal cultivation method, but because of the chaos in the union of 10,000 immortals, Dayu's official crackdown on the immortals is particularly severe. Presumably, in the past 2 years, everyone has suffered a lot of setbacks." His words stirred up the sadness of the emperors and ministers of the 5 countries. They looked at each other and could tell from each other's haggard faces and despondent eyes that they had not had a good time over the past few years. Apart from Yan Dan and his son, who looked radiant, and the group of ministers of Great Yan who seemed to have put on a little weight, the emperors and ministers of the other 5 dynasties all looked like refugees, looking very pitiful. This was especially true for Zhao Sheng and Wei Wuji. The smell of blood on them had not dissipated, and the injuries to their internal organs and immortal souls had not yet healed. The emperors and ministers of the 5 countries looked at each other for a while and sighed at the same time. Yingzheng toyed with the exquisite teacup in his hand and said coolly, "Pangu continent is indeed the birthplace of the human race. Everything here is good, but it does not allow those of us who have set foot on the path of immortality. To tell you the truth, in the past 2 to 3 years, 13 cities built by Daqin have been destroyed by the soldiers of Dayu, and Daqin has lost more than 1 million loyal soldiers." With a wry smile, Yingzhen put down the teacup and said coolly, "Not only Daqin, but all of you must have had a hard time over the past 2 years, except for Great Yan, right?" There was a long silence in the Great Hall. Chu Ping glanced at the people around him, then sighed faintly and said, "Since your Majesty Yingzheng has spoken his mind, I guess I'll speak my mind as well. When we first came here, Great Chu had built over 100 cities with the advantage of manpower. But over the past 2 years, only 25 cities remained intact, while the rest had been completely wiped out by Dayu. If not for the great distance between these cities, and the fact that they span across 5 provinces, perhaps Great Chu's power on Pangu continent would have been completely uprooted by now. Since Yingzheng and Chu Ping had opened their mouths to expose their scandals, Great Wei, Great Zhao, and Great Qi had let go of their reservations and pride, and told them the key points of the troubles they had encountered in the past 2 years. When Tianwen told them about the miserable experiences Great Qi had gone through in the past few years, the people exchanged glances. Sure enough, Pangu continent was not a good place to mess around. In the past few years, itinerant cultivators and itinerant immortals could still live a peaceful life. Although the attitude of the officials of Dayu towards those itinerant cultivator clans and itinerant immortals was stiff, it was not like the past 2 years, where they would kill anyone they saw. On top of that, Dayu's army was flying all over the place. Whenever they found a cultivator, even if it was a small fry of Xiantian realm who had not formed his Jin Dan realm, there would be hundreds of Dayu's soldiers who had the overall strength of gold immortals and heaven immortals rushing up and beating the cultivator to death. Under such an environment, the 5 dynasties were still able to maintain their foundation, which had not been wiped out by the Yu, and could still maintain a certain level of development. Wu Qi felt that they were simply too amazing. These heroes of the warring states truly lived up to their reputation, and their means were indeed very powerful. After a round of complaints, Wu Qi cleared his throat and interrupted the people, revealing his trump card. Slowly, Wu Qi rose to his feet and exercised the dragon kill. His body slowly grew taller in front of the crowd, and gradually expanded to a height of 100 feet. 2 7-colored dragon horns grew out of his forehead, and translucent purple-gold dragon scales covered his entire body. When the pearl-like light in the great hall shone on Wu Qi, the glittering dragon scales reflected the 7-colored light, making him look as dazzling as if he were made of crystal. A terrible pressure kept spreading out. Except for Yan Dan and his companions, the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties trembled at the same time. They were suffocated by the dragon pressure that Wu Qi deliberately released. Wu Qi deliberately raised his aura from the level of a 36th tier heaven immortal to the level of a gold immortal, then from the level of an 18th tier gold immortal to the peak of a 1st tier gold immortal, and finally to the level of a 9th tier primordial immortal. Every change in the pressure was so clear, and the process of it growing stronger was so clear. Ying Zheng and the others clearly understood what Wu Qi was doing. They stared blankly at Wu Qi and sensed that Wu Qi had raised his pressure 36 times in a row from the level of a 36th tier heaven immortal to the realm of gold immortal, and then raised it 18 times in a row to the level that they had only heard about in legends. Primordial. Wu Qi, who stood in front of the crowd, was already a primordial immortal. In other words, if Wu Qi wanted to, he could kill everyone here with a finger now. There was a consensus among the ancient almighty experts, all those below the Tao reasoning realm were ants. Now that Wu Qi had stepped into the realm of primordial, the realm of Tao reasoning, the people present were nothing more than ants that he could easily wipe out. Ying Zheng's face turned pale, and he coughed with difficulty. With him as the trigger, except for Yan Dan and the other emperors and courtiers of Great Yan, the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties began to cough at the same time, and the great hall was filled with the sound of coughing. Wu Qi had told them a lot of information in the most direct way. Now, they did not need to ask Yan Dan to know that Great Yan had invited them here not only for important information about Yu, but also for many other reasons. With a wry smile, Ying Zheng looked at Wu Qi and said in a deep voice, "Is it because of the cultivation technique of the human race that Prince Tianyun can cultivate so fast?" Wu Qi nodded slowly and said in a flat voice like a thunderclap, "Indeed, the cultivation technique of the human race improves very fast. As long as one's aptitude is not bad, and if he can get enough resources and heritage, there is a human who can step into the realm of gold immortal within 60 years, and attain the power of a primordial immortal within 100 years. If one could become a gold immortal within 60 years, he would have the overall strength comparable to a primordial immortal within a few hundred years." Ying Zheng opened his mouth, and after a long while, he smiled bitterly and said, "No wonder. But, can one live a long life by cultivating the cultivation technique of the human race?" Wu Qi remained silent for a while, then said frankly, "Cultivating the cultivation technique of the human race still can't escape the cycle of life and death. The cultivation technique of the human race can be mastered quickly, but one day, it will return to the dust. Although the cultivation technique of the immortal Tao is difficult, once one becomes a heaven immortal, one will no longer have to worry about one's lifespan. Unless a great tribulation strikes, one will eventually live a long and free life." Ying Zheng smacked his lips, narrowed his eyes, and nodded. "If that's the case, I'd better cultivate the cultivation technique of the immortal Tao. But, there will be a group of lineal descendants in Daqin's imperial clan who specialize in cultivating the cultivation technique of the human race. I wonder if Duke Tianyun can cultivate them wholeheartedly." After pondering for a while, Wu Qi nodded and said, "Of course, as long as they serve me wholeheartedly. Frankly speaking, I'm short of men now, a lot of them." After a brief pause, Wu Qi added, "I can guarantee that those among them with sufficient aptitude will possess the overall strength of a gold immortal in the shortest time possible. But, as for the realm of primordial, not everyone can step into it smoothly. The eyes of Ing Zheng and the other 4 emperors lit up at the same time. Wu Qi's promise had gone beyond the bottom line they had calculated in their minds just now. Wu Qi had brazenly shown off his primordial divine ability in front of them, and coupled with the 2 points Wu Qi had mentioned earlier, all the people present were smart enough to know what was in Wu Qi's mind. Therefore, they had quickly drawn up their demands and conditions in their minds, and were about to ask for an exorbitant price to discuss with Wu Qi. But, in the end, Wu Qi had already taken the initiative to fulfill their demands. And, what Wu Qi had promised was far beyond their imagination. But, they also noticed that Wu Qi had changed the way he addressed himself when he was talking. In order to seek immortality, your majesties are naturally unwilling to give up the cultivation techniques of immortals. I have the scriptures of the immortal Tao I seized from the primordial experts I killed, and I can provide them to you for free. As for the immortal stones and materials you need for your cultivation, I'll provide as many as you need. All I need is for you to give me advice and become my revered elders in the Dongxi province. Ing Zheng, Chu Ping, and the others exchanged a glance. It was a very generous offer. Their cultivation techniques could only allow them to reach the realm of heaven immortals, and they were worried that they would not be able to continue their cultivation in the future. The cultivation techniques of primordial experts. The gift was so generous that they couldn't raise any objections. Then, Wu Qi gave them another offer that they could no longer refuse. Based on my speculation, Panggu continent will be in chaos in a few years. As for the throne of the 6 dynasties, I have no intention of seizing it from you. The 6 dynasties will still exist, but they will need to exist as vassals of East Sea province, and the people of the 6 dynasties will have to serve me. And, I promise to do my best to cultivate 1 to 3 primordial experts for each of the 6 dynasties. Of course, they will all be practicing the cultivation techniques of the human race. The offer was too generous. The emperors and courtiers of the 5 dynasties exchanged glances, and then Wei Wuji asked Wu Qi why Panggu continent would be in chaos. Wu Qi immediately told them what had happened in Liangzhu in the past 2 months. The faces of the emperors and courtiers of the 5 dynasties fell instantly. If the chaos in Liangzhu affected the whole Panggu continent, the commotion it caused would completely destroy the 5 dynasties, wouldn't it? Perhaps the 5 dynasties could only rely on Wu Qi's East Sea province, and when they were strong enough, with strength and facts, Wu Qi had convinced the emperors and courtiers of the 5 dynasties in the most concise way. When everything seemed to be settled, only Xiang Yu rose to his feet. Looking at Yu Ji, who was imprisoned in midair, he asked in a flat voice, Great Yan's Prince of Tianyun, or should I say, De Yu's King of East Sea. There are some things that need to be explained. Ing Zheng and Huang Xie rose to their feet as well. Yes, there were some things that needed to be explained. Chapter 838. Xiang Yu's eyes were as resolute as a mountain, and as hot as a flame. Although his cultivation base was far weaker than Wu Qi's, his gaze actually made Wu Qi feel a stinging pain on his face. He pointed his finger at Yu Ji, who was hovering in midair, and said coolly, Put her down. I want to ask her what is going on. Compared to Xiang Yu, who had a firm mind, Huang Xie was a little sly. Pressing both hands on his belly, he said to Wu Qi with a smile on his face, It's true that Yuan is my beloved woman, but if she is a spy, and a spy who has deceived me for over 2,000 years, then I'll let the King of East Sea deal with her. Huang Xie's smile was light and indifferent, but the viciousness and ruthlessness in his words made one's heart turn cold. Meanwhile, Yu Tan's elder brother, Li Yuan, the current prime minister of Great Chu, was also smiling faintly at Wu Qi. He nodded and said, Although Yuan is a member of Li Yuan's family, the affairs of the state are the most important, and the law of the state cannot be violated. If Yuan has really done something detrimental to Great Chu, I hope the King of East Sea can deal with her. Compared to the firmness of Xiang Yu and the ruthlessness of Huang Xie and Li Yuan, Ing Zheng, whose face was livid with rage, was shrouded in a faint layer of dark mist. According to what the King of East Sea said, this empress of mine, for all these years, I've been longing for her in vain, and yet she was planted by someone with ulterior motives. Hateful, hateful, hateful. No matter who the person behind this is, I'll kill him with my own hands. Those who were related to Yu Ji, Yu Tan, and Yu Yao had all made their stand. Except for Xiang Yu, who did not have a clear attitude, Ying Zheng, Huang Xia, and Li Yuan had all shown the attitude of a formidable and ambitious man. Perhaps this was what Cao Cao had said, I would rather betray the people under the heaven than let the people under the heaven betray me. Ying Zheng, Huang Xia, and Li Yuan were the real formidable and ambitious men. Although women and love had a place in their hearts, they were not the most important things in their lives. Xiang Yu, on the other hand, could not be considered a qualified hero. At most, he was a tragic hero. Ignoring Ying Zheng and the other two, Wu Qi stared at Xiang Yu with a serious face and asked, my suggestion is to kill her now, then find 108,000 beautiful girls to play with for 3 to 5 years, and then you will forget about her. Do you really want to get to the bottom of this? Xiang Yu looked at Wu Qi coldly, shook his head and said, 3 to 5 years? I have missed her for more than 2,000 years. Even if I'm heartbroken by her, I have to get to the bottom of this. Shaking his head helplessly, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, this is your own choice, don't blame me. With a finger, the imprisoned Yu Ji let out a muffled groan. The black ribbons of light around her disintegrated one after another, and she fell to the ground in a sorry state. Xiang Yu leaned forward, wrapped his arms around Yu Ji's waist, and held her tightly in his arms. Looking at Xiang Yu's situation, Wu Qi could not help but sigh in his heart. He had planned to keep Xiang Yu alive to create some trouble for Liu Bang, but now it seemed that if he could not get past Yu Ji, it would be hard to say if Xiang Yu could still maintain the heroic spirit of the hegemon king of Western Chu. Coughing lightly, Wu Qi retracted the dragon kill and sat back down. He looked at Yu Ji, who had buried her head in Xiang Yu's arms, and said in a deep voice, all right, Yu Ji, it doesn't matter if you don't have this name. First of all, we need to make one thing clear. Back in Meng Mountains, you were the one who seduced me. Do you admit it? Yu Ji sighed softly. Ignoring Wu Qi's question, she reached out her hand and slowly caressed Xiang Yu's face. With a deep sob, Yu Ji sighed and said, when I first met you, you happened to have subdued that dark horse. You and your horse were like dragons, galloping and shouting wildly. That kind of heroic spirit had completely erased the impression of young master in my heart. Compared to you, who is alive and well, young master is just a lifeless statue made of clay. I have no idea what he is looking for. Wu Qi's eyelids drooped and he did not say a word. He sat up straight with both hands locked into a lotus incantation gesture and pressed them on his dantian, slowly regulating his internal energy. Meanwhile, Xiang Yu grabbed Yu Ji's shoulder and cried out in a hoarse voice, who is the young master you mentioned? Who is he? Yu Ji leaned her whole body into Xiang Yu's arms and said faintly, young master. Young master is Yu Mu, the young master of Liangzhu's Yu clan. Yu Ji is just the descendant of De Yu's sinful minister, and was bought by young master as a maidservant. Yu Ji and Yu Tan are biological sisters. Sister Yu Yao, on the other hand, is the descendant of Liangzhu's Yu clan, but she is just a member of a distant branch clan. Gently stroking Xiang Yu's face with both hands, Yu Ji sighed softly and said, the reason why I was sent to His Majesty was that someone had chosen His Majesty, intending to use His Majesty's power to unify the world and build an empire of the human race in the mortal world. Unfortunately, the son of the Crimson Emperor of the Celestial Court descended to the mortal world, and His Majesty suffered losses every time he fought with him. Finally, in the Battle of Gaixia, His Majesty's foundation was all gone, and he was brought to Myriad Immortals' planet. Xiang Yu's body trembled. Gritting his teeth, he looked down at Yu Ji and could not say a word for a long time. Now that we've talked, tell me why you are here on Myriad Immortals' planet. Wu Qi said coldly. Yu Ji turned around and leaned her back against Xiang Yu. She sneered at Wu Qi and said in a disdainful tone, why? Can't you guess it? It's nothing more than to continue controlling His Majesty and make him follow my will obediently. Laughing strangely, Yu Ji heaved a long sigh and said, although the people of the 6 dynasties are all controlled by Lord Lao Wang with the black celestial forbidden curse, is there any restrictive spell under the heaven that cannot be broken? The only restrictive spell under the heaven that cannot be broken is love. She giggled, then put her arms around Xiang Yu's waist and said in a low voice, with Yu Ji by His Majesty's side, even if His Majesty has broken the restrictive spell in the future, he will still be used by young master, right? Wu Qi did not say a word. Suddenly, Yingzheng laughed coldly and said, "Is that the reason why Yu Yao came back to me?" After a long silence, Yu Ji nodded slowly and said, "We might as well tell His Majesty, the Emperor of Daqin, that Sister Yu Yao has always loved young master deeply. Your Majesty is just a chess piece that she values, and that's why she deliberately approached and cultivated your Majesty when your Majesty was young and down." Laughing strangely again, Yu Ji said mockingly, "Why is your Majesty deceiving yourself and others? If Sister Yu Yao really loves you, why is she not willing to give birth to a child for you after being your empress for so many years?" Yingzheng's face turned livid as he roared furiously, "How presumptuous! Bitch! Shut your mouth!" Xiang Yu snorted coldly. With a gloomy face, he turned around and glared at Yingzheng and said, "Yingzheng, Yu Ji is my woman." Yingzheng narrowed his eyes, which were flashing like blades. Killing intent surged crazily from all over his body, and faint dragon roars could be heard coming out of his fists. A vast dragon aura was surging in Yingzheng's body, and it looked like he was about to unleash a full-force attack on Xiang Yu. Wu Qi sighed, clapped his hands, and said coolly, "Don't forget that we are allies now. Whoever dares to stir up an internal strife, I'll wipe out his entire clan. If you don't believe me, you can give it a try." Yingzheng's aura stagnated. He glared angrily at Yu Ji, then slowly took a few steps back and sat back in his seat. He did not look at Yu Yao again, as if she were a dead object hanging in midair. Even his face had returned to a calm expression, the kind of calmness that an emperor should have, where he had nothing on his mind, the kind of calmness that was as lifeless as a deep and quiet lake in the depths of the mountains. Huang Xia and Li Yuan exchanged a glance. Li Yuan shook his head lightly, while Huang Xia returned to his seat with a smile on his face. Yu Ji had already told them their background. Wouldn't it be too stupid to keep such a dangerous woman by their side? Wei Wuji, who was sitting off to the side, picked up a teacup and took a sip of tea. Stroking his beautiful mustache, he nodded at Yingzheng with a smile and said, "It's useless to keep such evil girls around. It's better to get rid of them as soon as possible. His Majesty Yingzheng and Duke of Chunshen are really decisive. Hee, what a pity for two beautiful women." Wei Wuji's tone was frivolous, as if Yu Yao and Yu Tan were two piles of worthless trash, and their life and death could be decided with just a word. All the eyes in the great hall, including Wu Qi and Ao Buzan, were fixed on Xiang Yu. There was no doubt that Great Chu was an indispensable and important part of the 6 states, and the power that Xiang Yu represented was half of Great Chu's current territory. If anything happened to Xiang Yu, even those who did not get along with him in the past would feel a little regretful. Suddenly, Huang Xia cried out, "As a man, how stupid can you be to hesitate for the sake of a woman? Huang Xia, if you dare to talk nonsense again, don't blame me for being ruthless." Xiang Yu cried out in a low voice. Immediately, Huang Xia shut his mouth tightly. He picked up the teacup and swirled it around his lips, then slammed it heavily on the table in front of him. Standing behind Wu Qi, Ao Buzan squinted at Xiang Yu and murmured, "He is willing to die for the sake of a woman. TSK, doesn't that mean Lao Tzu is going to die several hundred times a day? TSK, with a spear in hand, I have a beauty. As long as my body can withstand it, why should I worry about not having a beauty?" The great hall was filled with clamor for a while, and then returned to its deathly silence. Facing Wu Qi, Yu Ji's body suddenly trembled, and a strand of silver-gray blood with a bizarre color slowly trickled down from the corner of her mouth. She said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, the reason why I want to use Wu Qi to hurt you is so that your Majesty can absorb Chiyo's blood essence in a fit of rage, and then refine the true form of Chiyu." Looking at the silver-gray blood trickling down from the corner of Yu Ji's mouth, Wu Qi sighed and said, "I didn't notice it before, but now that I've made a great improvement in my cultivation base, I found that Xiang Yu is the only one who has lifted the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse. Do I need him to break the curse with Chio's blood essence when he is in a fit of rage? Yuji chuckled and said indifferently, I still need to use my own energy essence to guide it, only then will I be able to completely remove that seal. But I don't need to explain the process. Now that your majesty has lifted the curse, the 6 states can no longer accommodate me and my sisters. I'm very tired, so it's time for me to go. Xiang Yu was startled. He turned Yuji around, and when he saw the strange silver-gray blood trickling down from her mouth, his body began to tremble violently. Trembling, he looked at Yuji, whose life force was quickly disappearing from her eyes. Suddenly, he shouted at Wuqi at the top of his voice, Save her. I'm willing to serve you. Wuqi was stunned. Xiang Yu cried out again, Save her. I know you can save her. Save her, and I'll work for you for the rest of my life. The great hall fell into a dead silence. Ying Zheng and Huang Xie's faces were extremely unsightly. Chapter 839. Dressed in a long red dress, Yuji lay quietly in the great hall, with silver-gray blood flowing out of her mouth. Standing beside her, Xiang Yu looked like an ancient pine tree that had suddenly died of emptiness, lifeless and lifeless. His once energetic eyes had turned gray like a dead fish, and his soul seemed to be fading away along with the silver-gray blood in her mouth. Squatting beside her, Wuqi carefully dipped his fingertip into the silver-gray blood, then carefully examined it with a few mystic arts of poison identification he learned from the Directorate of Celestials. The silver-gray blood began to burn on Wuqi's fingertip, giving off a pungent burning aroma that sounded like stir-frying chili peppers. Even with the strength of Wuqi's fleshly body, he could still feel a tingling pain on his fingertip, and a small piece of his skin was charred by the silver-gray flame. Is this the 1,000 bugs juice with the blue belly hook as its main ingredient? Wuqi asked Yuji, whose body was gradually shrinking. It is ranked 758th among the 3,600 forbidden drugs of the Directorate of Celestials, a poison that can threaten the primordial golden body. Yuji looked at Wuqi with a hint of delight in her surprise and said, I didn't expect you to know so much about the Directorate of Celestials. Wuqi nodded seriously and said, Yes, I do know a lot about the Directorate of Celestials. When I was in Liangzhu this time, I personally wiped out a few clans with the legacy of Supreme Oracles, and there were many copies of the Directorate of Celestials stored in their houses. All these things belong to me now. Yuji smiled. Staring at Wuqi, she said coldly, You are just a tool. Little man, your first time is a tool. Xiang Yu's body trembled, and blood trickled down the corner of his mouth. Yuji's face flickered slightly. She turned her head away and dared not to look at him again. Wuqi smiled. He patted her on the head and said coolly, You are a very smart woman, but if you are too smart, you will only harm yourself and others. You are trying to provoke me so that I won't do my best to save you, aren't you? Yuji narrowed her eyes. Wuqi, save her with all your strength. The whole Xiang clan is yours. Xiang Yu cried out in a low voice. Huang Xia and Li Yuan's faces changed abruptly. They rose to their feet angrily, but Chu Ping said slowly, I think so too. If such a woman were to die, wouldn't it mean that the world would suddenly lose a precious treasure? King of Donghai, do your best to save Yuji. I am willing to help you with all the strength of Great Chu to achieve great things. Hearing that, Li Yuan bowed his head and sat back down. Huang Xie roared angrily, This is ridiculous. How can the life and death of a woman decide the fate of the imperial court? Your Majesty, and Xiang Yu, this is ridiculous. Wuqi gave a cold snort, then gave Huang Xia a sideways glance and said indifferently, looking down on women. Fu, Xiang, Ji, In, Xiang. Fuck your mother, why don't you try scolding your own father? You look down on women. Is your mother not a woman? Huang Xia was stunned. Just as he was about to refute Wuqi, Catfish Flood Dragon slowly pulled out a golden arhat thigh and threw it into her mouth, chewing happily. Catfish Flood Dragon patted her protruding chest to indicate her gender to Huang Xie. Huang Xie wisely shut his mouth. The others in the hall watched Catfish Flood Dragon chewing the thigh happily, with cold sweat dripping from their foreheads. Wu Qi sighed. Patting Yuji's head, he said, if I had been prepared, I could have saved you with the 1,000 bugs juice concocted with the blue belly of Een snake as the main ingredient, but you have taken too much. But the amount you took was too much, and I don't have any medicine on hand. Ugh. A complacent smile appeared on Yuji's face. She was about to say something, but Wu Qi stopped her. Patting Xiang Yu's thigh, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, I don't care if I am a tool or something else. I just want to say that a woman who is too smart often does the stupidest thing in the world. Do you think that after you broke the black celestial forbidden curse with that method, with his temperament, he would be able to live alone after he learns the truth? Yuji's face fell abruptly, and her body began to tremble violently. Looking in horror at the blood dripping from the corner of Xiang Yu's mouth, she cried out in a hoarse voice, I've wronged him. You just want to put an end to everything, don't you? Wu Qi said with a cold grin. I don't know where you were and what you did during the 2,000 years that Xiang Yu and the others were in Myriad Immortals planet, but when you were sent back to Xiang Yu, you were prepared to die, weren't you? Yuji stared blankly at Wu Qi, unable to say a word. Does it have anything to do with that young master of yours, Yu Miao? Wu Qi asked in a deep voice. And what have you done during these 2,000 years? Yuji closed her eyes and refused to say another word. Shaking his head, Wu Qi sighed and said, Woman, you never understand a man's heart. Xiang Yu is different from Yingzheng, Huang Xia, and the others. Yingzheng, Huang Xia, and the others are all people who can sit on the throne, but look at Xiang Yu. Does he look like an emperor? How could he look like an emperor? Yuji clenched her fists tightly and cried out in a hoarse voice, why hasn't the poison of the 1,000 bugs juice taken effect yet? Wu Qi shook his head and said, among the 3,600 forbidden medicines of the Directorate of Celestials, 1,000 bugs juice is the slowest to take effect but the most difficult to expel. It will take about 2 hours for you to really die. We have plenty of time to clear things up between you and Xiang Yu. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi asked, let me be frank, do you still love Xiang Yu? Shrugging, Wu Qi touched the back of his hand, which had goosebumps all over it, and said with a wry smile, this question makes my skin crawl. But, I really want to know, do you love Xiang Yu or that young master of yours? Yuji closed her eyes tightly, and after a long while, she said in a hoarse voice, if I don't, why would I do this? I just want him to be happy, just like when I first met him, taming the fiercest horse, wielding the fastest knife, and killing the most ferocious beasts. He should be a tiger roaming freely in the mountains, not a man who is imprisoned by restrictive spells and is at the mercy of others at any time. Mouthfuls of silver-gray blood sprayed out of her mouth as she said in a sobbing voice, if I don't love him, why didn't I ask Yu Yao and Yu Tan to report what happened here to young master? If I hadn't begged them, how could you have gained a foothold on Panga continent? Xiang Yu clenched his fists, opened his mouth, and spat out an arrow of bright red blood. Save her, Wu Qi. Don't talk nonsense. Looking up at Xiang Yu, who was like a mad tiger, Wu Qi said coolly, what's the hurry? 2 hours before the poison takes effect and he dies. Well, to be honest, the poison of the 1,000 bugs juice. Well, can you wait for me to finish? With such an impatient temper, no wonder you were robbed by Lu Bang years ago. Xiang Yu was so angry that his face turned blue. He screamed and jumped around in the great hall for a while, then came panting to stand next to Wu Qi, staring at Yuji with his teeth clenched. Xiang Zhuang, Fan Zeng, and the others, fearing that something might happen to him, hurried over and held him from both sides. Ignoring Xiang Yu, Wu Qi looked at Yuji and said with a sigh, it's not easy to get Chiyo's blood essence, is it? There are only some members of Chiyu clan left in Xianyuan Peak. With your status, who did you ask to get their blood essence from the experts of Chiyu clan? Yuji stared coldly at Wu Qi and said coolly, with my status in young master's eyes, with my position in young master's heart, what kind of means do you think I can use to beg someone? Do you still need to ask these questions? Do you want me to tell you something? Wu Qi nodded slowly. Xiang Yu let out a loud roar and coughed up another mouthful of blood. Fan Zheng and Xiang Zhuang trembled with fear and quickly grabbed Xiang Yu's arms to stop him from going crazy. He stared fixedly at Yu Ji, but he could not sense any will to live from her eyes. He could not help but smile bitterly and said, for a proud man like Xiang Yu, how could he let his woman pay such a huge price just to save him? You are forcing him to commit suicide, not saving him. Yu Ji's body trembled, and her face turned ashen. Wu Qi remained silent for a while, then he rose to his feet and said coolly, well, time is running out. I'll give all of you who are related to this matter the most direct solution. I'll send Yu Ji, Yu Tan, and Yu Yao into transmigration, and escort their souls to be reincarnated in a good family, completely erasing the karma entanglement between them and Yu Miao. If anyone is still thinking about them, they can go and look for them after they are reincarnated. Xiang Yu stamped his foot and said, reincarnation? What the hell are you talking about? Yu Ji sighed faintly and said, reincarnation? Do I still have a chance to be reincarnated? Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Yu Ji suddenly called Xiang Yu's name. Xiang Yu's body trembled as he squatted down. Stroking her face with both hands, he said in a deep voice, what do you want? Yu Ji looked at Xiang Yu and smiled. She sighed and said, let Yu Ji be reincarnated. Let Yu Ji follow Your Majesty cleanly in the next life. Let Yu Ji forget everything in the past. Yu Ji only wants to remember those happy things when I first met the king. Yu Ji does not want to remember those things that make Yu Ji unhappy. If Yu Ji is reincarnated, will you come to find me? Tears of blood trickled down from Xiang Yuhu's eyes. Gnashing his teeth, he nodded heavily and punched the ground hard. Wu Qi nodded his head and breathed out a sigh of relief in his heart. After talking for so long, he had finally found the best solution. After sending Yu Ji to be reincarnated, Wu Qi would definitely erase her memory of what happened in Meng Mountains. Breathing a long sigh, Wu Qi turned to look at Yu Tan and Yu Yao, frowning. What do you think? Wu Qi asked Huang Xia and Ing Zheng. Huang Xia did not say a word. Since she is unwilling to give birth to a child for me, said Ing Zheng coldly and mercilessly. Let her be. With a flick of his sleeve, Ing Zheng rose to his feet and strode out of the great hall together with all the civil and military officials of Daqin. In a deep voice, he said, may I trouble the king of East Sea to send her to be reincarnated, let her be in the next life. When they were almost out of the great hall, Ing Zheng suddenly stopped. Without looking back, he stood in front of the door and said coolly, I will no longer respect her, protect her, obey her, and let her do whatever she wants in the state. If the king of East Sea can do it, please let her be reincarnated as a member of Daqin's imperial clan. At least I can still love and pity her. As for those trivial matters, just let her be. Suddenly, Ing Zheng's tall and straight body stooped, as if he had aged several hundred years. Then, he walked slowly out of the great hall. Wu Qi turned to look at Huang Xia, but Huang Xia avoided Wu Qi's gaze. Wu Qi sighed and nodded seriously. Chapter 840. The bright moon hung high in the sky. On the top of a mountain outside Anhe City, Xiang Yu and Yu Ji were snuggling together under an ancient tree. Both of their eyes were red, but their expressions were still calm. After all, Wu Qi had just assured them that as long as some specific marks were added to Yu Ji's soul, Xiang Yu would be able to find her easily after she was reincarnated. Yu Tan and Yu Yao were standing next to each other, their faces extremely unsightly. But in comparison, Yu Yao's face still had a trace of human vitality, and she was whispering something to Hu Hai. Yu Tan's face, on the other hand, looked like a dead person, completely bereft of all life. Hu Hai, the prince of crime of Daqin, was curled up in a dark prison cart, which hovered in front of Yu Yao. With a hint of madness in his voice, he was telling her what Ing Zheng had asked him to bring. Yu Yao's body was trembling slightly, and 2 lines of tears were rolling down her cheeks. Occasionally, she would wave her arms violently and argue with Hu Hai. Only Yu Tan was ignored. She stood alone under an ancient pine tree, staring blankly at Yu Ji, who was accompanied by Xiang Yu, and Yu Yao, who was being talked to by the sun sent by Ing Zheng. Yu Tan stood there blankly, as empty as a paper doll. The night breeze blew across her dress, as if to blow her up into the sky. Wu Qi, who had been watching quietly from the side, walked up slowly and cleared his throat. I still remember the 3 questions you asked me years ago, Lady Yutan. Yutan's body trembled. She dared not to look at Wu Qi, but just bowed her head and sighed. After a long while, she said faintly, in fact, we sisters have let you down. We should have informed him about what happened here, but... With a chuckle, Wu Qi said coolly, fortunately, you didn't tell your young master about the people of the 6 dynasties coming to Pangu continent. Otherwise, the Yu clan in Liangzhu would have been wiped out a month ago. You should know that I am now the king of East Sea to you. However, you don't know that if I want to deal with the Yu family, I have many ways to make them die without knowing why. Yu Tan looked at Wu Qi blankly. Wu Qi shook his head and said, you've saved the entire Yu family. Of course, I have a good relationship with the elders of the Yu family. Even if you tell your young noble everything, I will only take his life. With a strange smile, Wu Qi sighed and said, it's a pity that you didn't send out the information about the 6 nations. In fact, I've been waiting for you to do this. What? Yu Tan raised her head in shock, crying out in a low voice. Wu Qi gazed at Yu Tan, speaking in a low voice that was almost cruel, I know there's something wrong with you 3. I've been waiting for you to leak the information of the 6 dynasties. I'll wait for the masters behind you to act against the 6 countries. I'll wait for the emperors and ministers of the 6 countries to be forced into a corner. Then, I'll smoothly and logically take over their forces. It's a pity that Yu Ji begged you not to do that. Yu Tan stared blankly at Wu Qi, as if Wu Qi was an evil ghost. Shaking his head lightly, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, look, just a few words from me have frightened you. How could Grandmaster Yu Tan, whose name had shaken Great Yen in those years, be frightened by a few words from me? In fact, all of you are nice girls, but you shouldn't do these things. Wrapping his arms around Yu Tan's body, he gently planted a kiss on her forehead. Girls are meant to be loved and caressed, he said in a low voice, and you shouldn't be treated as tools. That Yu Zong will die. As for you, forget all this, and be a good man in your next life. The moonlight shone like water, just like what had happened in a courtyard in Ji City a long time ago. Yuing looked at Wu Qi's face, which was still as young as a teenager. For a moment, she was bewildered. 2 streams of tears rolled down her cheeks as Wu Qi sighed and said, I will try my best to control Yu Yao to reincarnate as a member of the Daqin imperial clan within 100 years, but I don't know when she will be reincarnated. You and Yu Ji, I will make sure you become real sisters in your next life. Actually, I think Xiang Yu is a good guy. After calculating with his fingers for a while, Wu Qi smiled at Yu Tan and said, although he is a man who is a little impulsive, a little reckless, a little too loyal to his friends, and a little too easily trusting of others, and a little too thin-skinned, he is a man who knows how to behave himself. But at least he was still sincere to his woman. So, in your next life, you and Yu Ji should be twin sisters, twin sisters. Oh, don't tell him who you are, let him marry both of you. Yu Tan stared at Wu Qi with her mouth agape. This is absurd, she stammered. Patting Yu Tan's head forcefully, Wu Qi laughed strangely and said, absurd? As long as he is better than Huang Xie. The 4 young masters of the Warring States period. TSK, I still need to settle the score with Lord Long Yang, but this Lord Chunshan. He let out a few strange laughs, then gave Xiang Yu a malicious look, who was hugging Yu Ji and murmuring sweet nothings. Suddenly, he breathed out a heavy sigh and said, this guy can kill people, can set fires, can conquer the world, and can even coax women. TSK, he is a man of the highest grade. You will not suffer if you follow him. Believe me, in your next life, you will follow him wholeheartedly. Yu Tan narrowed her eyes and pondered for a while. Suddenly, she laughed and said, if that is what you said, then I'll try my best. Sighing softly, Yu Tan looked up at the bright moon in the sky and said, I'm really tired. When I asked those 3 questions, I was already tired. But, I can't stop, there's no way I can stop. My life is given by my young master. If I stop, I don't know what to do. Stroking Yutan's long hair, Wuqi said in a deep voice, nonsense. Your life is given by your father and mother. What does it have to do with your young master? If you're tired and can't find what to do, find a new goal for yourself, live well, live happily. You've been miserable in this life, so in your next life, you must live well. Just do whatever you want to Xiang Yu. He won't mind getting a beautiful woman for no reason, will he? After murmuring for a while, Wuqi threw out a zither, smiled at Yutan and said, today is a good day. What do you think, Miss Yutan? Yutan sighed softly and smiled. Wiping the tears off her face, she picked up the zither and sat down under an ancient pine tree. She carefully adjusted the zither for a while, then played a melody of nature with her jade-like fingers. It was like a bright moon shining high in the sky, like a clear spring in the wild, like a gust of wind blowing through the pine forest, like a crane crying in the sky. The zither melody rang out, and even Huhai, who was talking to Yuyao nervously, was taken aback, throwing a few curious glances over. Seeing that Yutan was playing the zither with a smile on her face, Huhai said to Yuyao carelessly, look at her, she's so happy to die. Why are you still nagging? The sooner you die, the sooner you can reincarnate. My imperial father said that if you become my younger sister in your next life, I'll treat you well. Huhai snorted coldly, then turned and walked away like a dark cloud. While walking, he said nervously, if you were willing to give birth to a child for my imperial father and stay by his side, perhaps the empire of Daqin would be stable forever, and the empire would still exist until today. I didn't expect you to be a spy sent by an outsider. What a waste of my imperial father's sincerity to you. Looking at the bright moon in the sky, Huhai suddenly heaved a long sigh and said, Senior Ao Buzan is right. For women, the time they spend in bed is the most precious. Once they get out of bed, it's best to throw them as far away as possible. This is truly a wise saying. Wuqi nearly fell to the ground. How did Huhai hook up with Ao Buzan in such a short time? Looking at Huhai with a flicker in his eyes, Wuqi suddenly laughed. Huhai was a good material, and if he could be taught well, he would be of great use. At least, he was much more fun than his elder brother, Fu Su. If Wuqi wanted to cultivate a spokesperson in Daqin, who would be more suitable than Huhai? Amidst the beautiful and ethereal music of Yutan, Yuji nestled in his arms with a faint smile on her face. Silver-gray blood oozed out from every pore on her body, and her fragrant and delicate body quickly turned cold and stiff. In just a blink of an eye, the beautiful woman had turned into a translucent silver-gray crystal. Wuqi waved his hand, and Yuyao and Yutan gave a muffled snort at the same time. Their foreheads split open, and a wisp of their souls flew out. Wuqi chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice, then a faint ray of light shot out from his forehead and enveloped the souls of Yuji, Yuyao, and Yutan. His fingers quickly drew the swastika Buddhist seal and the lotus soul protecting Vajra seal in the void. He used the Buddhist mystic arts in the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture to help the three girls solidify their souls. At the same time, he ensured that their souls would not be invaded by external evils. After they reincarnated, they would be able to remember what they should remember. As for what they should remember, it would depend on what Wuqi wanted them to remember. Those painful, troubling, unbearable, sad, and all the negative memories were erased by Wuqi. Just like Yuji, apart from the part where she drew her sword and committed suicide in the Battle of Gaixia, all the other bad memories were gradually blurred under the illumination of the Buddha's light. All the blurred memories had turned into a thread of well-tempered affection, firmly attached to Xiangyu. Wuqi had also done the same thing to Yutan's memory, which was enough to ensure that she would have a good impression of him after reincarnation. As for Yuyao, Wuqi did not want to destroy the current tacit understanding between him and Yingzheng, so he only erased the things that should be erased, and did not do anything else. After making some adjustments to the three girls' souls, Wuqi did not hesitate to consume his own soul source, extracting a thread of soul source energy and injecting it into the girls' souls. The threat of soul source energy Wu Qi had now was by no means insignificant. If converted, it was roughly equal to the strength of an immortal soul of a peak stage heaven immortal. After being generously bestowed by Wu Qi, the girls' souls suddenly emitted a faint golden glow, which made their souls extremely stable. They no longer had to worry about any accidents when they were reincarnated. When Xiangyu saw the changes in the girls' souls, he cupped his fist gratefully at Wu Qi and said, "Thank you." Although it was just two simple words of thanks, Wu Qi could hear a heavy responsibility from them. Smiling and nodding at Xiangyu, Wu Qi did not want to waste any more time. He tore open the void and threw the girls' souls into the nether world where the 6 paths of reincarnation was located. His enormous divine will transformed into an invisible net and smashed into the depths of the nether world. Wu Qi was going to open the gate of reincarnation for the girls' souls, sending them straight into the transmigration and reincarnate according to Wu Qi's will. All of a sudden, a huge hand shining with golden light whizzed over from the void and grabbed the 3 women's souls. Wu Qi was taken aback, and then he roared out at the same time as Xiangyu, who had witnessed everything. Chapter 841. This was the first time Wu Qi tore open the void and came into contact with the nether world. Even a primordial immortal would not come into contact with a place like this for no reason. His divine sense was fully focused on searching for the 6 paths of reincarnation, and he did not notice the golden palm suddenly emerging from the void. When the souls of the 3 women were taken away by the golden palm, Wu Qi hurriedly sent his divine sense into it. But, it happened so suddenly, and the palm left even faster. On top of that, it was very familiar with the space and energy composition of the nether world, so the golden light disappeared in just a flash. Xiangyu panicked. With a furious hiss, he curled up his body and jumped into the gap Wu Qi had torn open. Wu Qi snorted angrily as well. He grabbed Xiangyu and strode into the gap he had torn open. As soon as he entered the nether world, 2 beams of light flashed behind him. Ao Buzan and Catfish, who were feasting in Anhe City, had caught up with them and rushed into the gap as well. The nether world was a strange space naturally formed by the laws of the heavenly Tao after the great Saint Pangu created the world. There was no sky or earth here, no sky or ground, no sky or ground, no day or night, and no time. Anyone who entered this place would feel as if they were suspended in a pool of paste, unable to move even a step. In addition, there was a strange force in this grayish space that emanated a pale yellow glow. As soon as Wu Qi and the others entered, they felt a strange force was eroding their bodies and attacking their souls. The force was cold and evil, invisible and traceless, but it was real. Before they could adapt to the various strange things in this world, Wu Qi took Xiangyu and flew in the direction where the golden palm had disappeared. They flew at high speed all the way. There was no air or spirit qi that cultivators were familiar with here. What filled the void around them was a bone-chilling evil energy. Amidst the deep death qi, there was a vigorous life force. However, within that life force, there was also a sense of death that was about to wither. The concentration of the energy was so high that it condensed into a thick fog in the void. The pale yellow fog prevented Wu Qi and the others from flying, and it took them 100 times more energy to transform into beams of light and fly forward than on Pangu continent. The deep sound of waves was faintly heard, and a great suction came from several directions. Wu Qi fixed his eyes on that direction and saw a dark yellow ocean in the far distance. Huge waves rose from the boundless ocean from time to time, and countless ghosts were soaked in it, howling and struggling, but they could not break free from the sticky liquid. In the depths of the ocean, some strange-looking creatures were gradually growing, and some adult strange creatures were running back and forth with iron tridents in their hands. From time to time, they would pick up a few ghosts and stuff them into their mouths. As they chewed, the miserable howls of the ghosts could be heard by Wu Qi and the others, piercing their ears like awls. The Nether, the Yellow Spring. This was the legendary Yellow Spring, and those strange creatures were the native creatures of the Nether world, the Yakshas of the Nether world. If one could enter the Yellow Spring without dying, he would reach the legendary Nether Blood Sea, which was the condensation of the foulest energy between heaven and earth. Some people said that the nether world was the great Saint Panga's navel, and that the nether blood sea was formed from a wisp of innate filthy energy that the great saint had not fully refined, and then merged with the innate transmigration aura that gave birth to the nether world. Wu Qi gave the yellow spring a deep look, then said in a deep voice while pulling Xiang Yu and flying at top speed, "I have a chapter of Blood Sea Grand Magic with me. If you cultivate it with the banner of Qi Yu and the Qi Yu Fiend technique, as well as the fact that I can touch your cultivation base and pass down my cultivation base to you, you will have a very strong cultivation base in the shortest time possible. Well, in a year or two on Panga continent, I can make you a peak-level gold immortal. Are you interested?" Xiang Yu's answer was very straightforward. "I'll save Yu Ji and send her safely into the transmigration. I'll listen to you." Wu Qi's answer was also very straightforward. "That's a deal. I'll wipe out the whole clan of whoever took their souls." A murderous gleam shot out of Xiang Yu's eyes. Ao Buzan, who was listening to the conversation between Wu Qi and Xiang Yu, roughly figured out what was going on. He could not help but sneer and say, I was wondering what was going on. As for who could snatch people in the netherworld, who else could it be other than that group of baldies? Even the celestial court does not have the mood to interfere in the transmigration. Only those baldies have the guts to do so. Wu Qi snorted coldly, while Xiang Yu gnashed his teeth and said, "If anything happens to Yu Ji, I'll slaughter all the baldies in the world." While they were talking, Wu Qi had gone far into the distance. Along the way, hundreds of huge yikshaws, riding on all kinds of strange and ferocious beasts, soared into the sky, trying to kill Wu Qi and his companions as food. Unfortunately, these yikshaws had encountered a higher existence in the food chain who was fiercer than them. Catfish swung her hammer and smashed these yikshaws and ferocious beasts to pieces, then grabbed them and stuffed them into her mouth. While chewing on these unlucky yikshaws and ferocious beasts, Catfish commented vaguely, "They taste good, and quite chewy. No smell of blood. Their bodies are formed by the crisscrossing aura of life and death, and they are cool to the heart. How do we get in here?" Wu Qi had casually taught Catfish Flood Dragon the divine ability to enter the nether world through the mind connection technique, and his unintentional action had become the source of nightmares for the Yiksha clan in the Yellow Spring for a very long time in the future. In the future, whenever summer came to Panga continent, Catfish would tear open the void and come here to catch a large number of yikshas and fierce beasts as snacks to relieve the heat. This nightmare would not last until an opportunity came in the future, when Wu Qi spoke, and only then did Catfish stop this terrible massacre of yiksha tribes. The escaping light tore through the void and flew forward. Meanwhile, a wisp of Wu Qi's divine sense locked onto the golden palm that was fleeing in front of him. The time and space in the netherworld could not be compared with a world like Panga continent, where the laws were extremely clear. The netherworld was like a paste, and the concepts of time and space were so vague that no one could understand them. In short, after Wu Qi's heart beat 677 times in the netherworld, the front suddenly became clear. They had arrived at the end of the road. In front of them was a boundless yellow spring ocean. The water of the yellow spring rolled ceaselessly, rolling up thousands of miles-high waves on the surface of the ocean. Amidst the raging waves, a huge wheel of light, 360 million miles in diameter, was vaguely embedded in the water. It was divided into 6 equal parts, spinning slowly and producing a deafening rumble. Carved on its surface were heaven, earth, man, deities, ghosts, flowers, birds, insects, fishes, and many other creatures. It was black and white in color, emitting a black and white spirit light that illuminated the sky, forcing the surrounding yellow spring to churn and form countless whirlpools. The shockingly huge waves were caused by the impact of the black and white spirit light. As they slapped heavily on the surface of the yellow spring, the collapse of each wave shook the surrounding void. Countless ghosts soaked in the yellow spring, wailing and screaming as they rolled toward the huge wheel of light. Countless beams of black and white spirit light shot out of the wheel, each corresponding to a ghost. Attracted by the black and white spirit light, the ghosts were sucked into the 6 parts of the wheel of light and disappeared without a trace. This was the 6 paths of reincarnation, the place where the souls of all the living beings in this world created by great Saint Pangu reincarnated. What Wu Qi and the others saw was that in just a second, trillions of souls had been sucked into the 6 paths of reincarnation. At the same time, countless more ghosts were sucked into the wheel of light from all directions, roaring and howling furiously. But what was shocking was that, around this enormous wheel of 6 paths of reincarnation, about 1,000,000 miles away, a few huge mountain ranges that stretched for tens of millions of miles grew out of the yellow spring. No matter how the water of the yellow spring pounded against them, they remained motionless. On the tallest hundreds of mountains in the giant mountain range, there was a Buddhist light shrouding them. Countless lotus ponds and Bodhi forests formed a graceful Buddhist garden. Buddhist monasteries were scattered all over the garden, and the chanting of sutras could be heard coming from each of the monasteries. 800 Buddhist bodhisattvas, clad in kasayas that were as clean as water, sat cross-legged on white lotus thrones and hovered in midair. Their bodies emitted a boundless light that illuminated the void. Wherever the light passed, the water of the yellow spring turned as clear as a mountain stream, and even the ferocious yakshas obediently put down their weapons and knelt on the surface of the water to worship. Below the 800 bodhisattvas were 108,000 golden arhats standing on lotus flowers. These arhats were chanting mantras, and as their saliva splashed everywhere, lotuses appeared out of thin air. As long as a ghost above the yellow spring cried out the name of Buddha, a lotus sprayed out from the mouth of an arhat would gently fall and touch the ghost's forehead. With just a touch, the ghosts would emit a Buddhist light. For those with a weak Buddhist light, 3 to 5 lotuses would escort them into the 6 paths of reincarnation, where they would choose a rich and kind family to be reincarnated. For those with a strong Buddhist light, a golden arhat would descend personally to bring them out of the yellow spring, purify them with the power of Buddha, and send them to a garden temple on the mountain for further cultivation. There were also a few ghosts who emitted a boundless light after being touched by the lotus, and sometimes, their power was no weaker than that of the golden arhat. If one encountered such a ghost, a bodhisattva would descend from the sky and reach out both hands to bring the ghost out of the yellow spring. A lotus would bloom slowly in the palm of the bodhisattva, and inside it was the pure land of Buddhism. Generally, these ghosts would step into the Buddhist kingdom in the palm of the bodhisattva, and from then on, become immortal and enjoy the happiness of the Buddha. The golden palm that Wu Qi and the others were tracking swayed across the sky and transformed into a 3 feet tall golden arhat. He flew respectfully to a 30 feet tall bodhisattva, and handed over the souls of the 3 girls, who were glowing with a strong golden light and emanating a strong aura of the Buddha, to the bodhisattva. Wu Qi slapped himself on the forehead angrily. How stupid he was. It was known to all the immortals in the universe that the Buddhist League could control part of the transmigration power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. How could he have overlooked this fatal problem? He had strengthened the souls of the 3 girls, and even purified them with the divine power of the Buddhism League. Wasn't this forcing these almighty experts of the Buddhism League in the nether world to snatch them away? Flustered, Wu Qi snapped, "Bald donkey, put the 3 girls down." Wu Qi used all his strength to roar, which immediately shook the water of the yellow spring in all directions and set off huge waves that were tens of thousands of miles high. On the mountain, 800 bodhisattvas and 108,000 arhats looked over at the same time. Chapter 842. The bodhisattva, who was holding a lotus flower as clean as jade in one hand and imprisoning the souls of the 3 girls, gave Wu Qi a look from a distance and suddenly laughed. "Why do you say that, benefactor? These 3 are believers of the Buddhist League, and they are fated with us. I've made a great vow to bring all the souls of the nether world into the Buddhist League, so that I can attain the golden body of Buddha." With a wave of his hand, he sprinkled a beam of Buddhist light down onto Wu Qi's head and said indifferently, "Benefactor, you are a living person, and this is the residence of the dead. You'd better leave quickly and not disturb this peaceful place of the Buddhist League." The faint beam of Buddhist light contained endless mysteries, and the shadow of a world could be vaguely seen in its tough and tenacious light. It actually contained all the power of the Buddhist kingdom in a palm. Although the light was still tens of miles away from Wu Qi, the tremendous pressure that came rushing at them had torn the clothes of Wu Qi and his companions to shreds. Although it seemed like a casual strike, it had actually killed Wu Qi and his companions. The power of the Buddhist kingdom in a palm was enough to suppress an ordinary gold immortal, and no matter how strong one was, he or she would be forcibly suppressed by it. As for where they would be sent and what kind of treatment they would receive after being suppressed, only the people of the Buddhist League knew. As the bodhisattva struck, the other bodhisattvas and arhats joined their palms together and chanted, "Great merciful Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva of the six paths of enlightenment." As the bodhisattva and arhats chanted, the power of the beam of Buddhist light suddenly skyrocketed by 10,000 times. The bodhisattva who struck was only at the level of peak bodhisattva, and there was still a slight gap between him and the realm of Buddha. He was also the one with the highest cultivation base among the 800 bodhisattvas. The cultivation base of the other bodhisattvas was far weaker than his, and the other four strongest bodhisattvas were only as strong as third-tier gold immortals. But after the beam of Buddhist light skyrocketed by 10,000 times, the suppressive force was no different from a casual strike of an ordinary Buddha. He could actually unleash the strength of a Buddha with the body of a bodhisattva. Wu Qi snorted coldly. His body abruptly expanded to nearly 1,000 meters tall. Dense dragon scales emerged from his skin, and the pair of dragon horns on his forehead shone with a dazzling, seven-colored light. He threw his head back and let out a long roar, causing the yellow spring to sway with great waves as he raised both hands to meet the beam of Buddhist light. I've long heard that the Buddhist Dharma is vast and profound. Today, let me experience it for myself. The Buddhist light gently fell on Wu Qi's hands, and a huge pressure fell on his head. Even with Wu Qi's cultivation base, the cloud under his feet couldn't help but sink, and he almost fell into the yellow springs. A large sheet of Buddhist fire, as clear as glass, silently gushed out of the Buddhist light, wrapping around Wu Qi's body and burning quietly. The dragon scales on the surface of Wu Qi's body glowed with a purple gold light, intertwining with the fire and producing a muffled explosion from time to time. Vaguely, an extremely gentle and generous voice rang out in Wu Qi's ears. The voice kept persuading Wu Qi to turn over a new leaf and submit to the Buddhist League, persuading him to lay down his butcher's knife and become a Buddha. The voice kept seeping into Wu Qi's spiritual sea, but any sound waves that seeped into Wu Qi's spiritual sea were devoured by Wu Qi. This was the divine ability of the Buddhist League, a divine ability that transformed the supreme power of the Buddhist League into a wisp of sound to guide people into the Buddhist League. The essence of this divine ability was the purest Zen power of the Buddhist League. With the domineering power of the myriad harmonization grand magic that Wu Qi cultivated, when this Zen power penetrated into his body, wasn't it the same as sending him a tonic? Holding the heavy Buddhist light with both hands, Wu Qi let the divine ability of the Buddhist League continue to pour into his spiritual sea. Like a glutton, his divine soul excitedly opened its mouth to devour this pure Zen power, constantly digesting it to nourish itself. The stalemate lasted for a full quarter of an hour. When nearly half of the arhats on the mountain were so thirsty that they couldn't speak, and their faces began to turn pale, Wu Qi finally waved his fist and shattered the Buddhist light above his head. The power of a realm was forcibly shattered by Wu Qi. When the Buddhist light was shattered, the lotus throne on which the bodhisattva sat made a crisp sound, and a long crack suddenly appeared on one of the lotus petals. Wu Qi laughed strangely. These monks went for wool and came home shorn. The arhats, who had ugly expressions and could not even speak, were the unlucky ones who had injected their Zen power into the Buddhist light of the bodhisattva, transforming it into the divine ability of the Buddhist light to attack Wu Qi. The divine ability of the Buddhist light they used to attack Wu Qi was completely digested by Wu Qi in just a quarter of an hour. At this moment, their minds were empty, without a trace of psyche power. If they wanted to recover their peak cultivation, they would need at least 3 to 5 months to recuperate. After draining the psyche power of tens of thousands of arhats and shattering the bodhisattva's lotus throne, Wu Qi folded his arms across his chest and sneered at the bodhisattva. Release the souls of the 3 girls and let me escort them to reincarnation. Then, give me a reward that is enough to satisfy me, and I won't pursue the crime of offending you today. Otherwise, I'll smash your bald heads and destroy your Taoist right temple. Let's see how you Buddhists are going to meddle in the affairs of the 6 paths of reincarnation. As Wu Qi let out a cold laugh, the dark-green celestial tower silently emerged from the top of his head. Countless beams of silver-purple starlight shot down from it, condensing into tens of thousands of stars the size of water tanks and spinning ceaselessly in the void. The rumbling of the stars went straight into one's internal organs, making one's heart, liver, and lungs tremble. The Bodhisattva's face flickered slightly. The lotus flower in his palm turned into a wisp of white light and disappeared into his palm, along with the souls of the 3 girls. He had forcibly brought the souls of the 3 girls into his Buddhist kingdom. It was obvious that he did not want to hand them over. Laughing coldly, the Bodhisattva, who was clad in a kasaya, adorned with golden pearls and pearls, a golden mandala flower on his head, and a pink lotus flower on his shoulders, said in a cold voice, "May I know which lord of Diyu you are? Why have you intruded into the Buddhist League's tranquil land and disturbed it? Why don't you leave now? Are you trying to cause a conflict between the Buddhist League and Diyu?" Wu Qi was struck dumb. With the dark-green celestial tower hovering over his head, he could exercise the dragon kill. With this appearance, he had killed 3 Buddhas, robbed Buddha Phutu, and killed tens of thousands of cultivators of the Buddhist League. His appearance should have been widely known in the Buddhist League, shouldn't it? And yet, this Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva Ksitigarbha did not know who he was. Moreover, he only accused Wu Qi of trespassing into his Buddhist League's tranquil land. Why didn't he say that his men had kidnapped Wu Qi's people? With a cold snort, Wu Qi clenched his teeth and said, "I'm the king of East Sea of Diyu. A few months ago, I was still the Marquis of East Sea province of Diyu, Tan Lang." Upon hearing Wu Qi's title, the Bodhisattva just shook his head and said, "King of East Sea? I've never heard of your name. No matter who you are, as long as you leave the netherworld, I can forgive you for trespassing into the Buddhist League's tranquil land today." Wu Qi was stunned. He looked at the Bodhisattva in astonishment. He was thick-skinned, but he refused to mention anything about Yu Ji and the other 2 girls. But, he didn't know his name. Since he had killed 3 Buddhas and robbed Buddha Phutu, Lord Buddha Amitabha should have put him on the wanted list. So, why didn't he react at all when he heard his name? Off to the side, Ao Buzan muttered, "Is this guy Ksitigarbha? Lao Tzu has heard of his name. He is older than the current Lord Buddha Amitabha of the Buddhist League. No, he should be older than the Lord Buddha of the recent dozens of generations. He served the great Vairocana Buddha, the Lord Buddha of the Buddhist League 100 generations ago, and was the eldest disciple of that Lord Buddha. Later, when the Buddhist League attacked the netherworld, he made a great wish to oversee the 6 paths of reincarnation." Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he vaguely understood something. He cleared his throat and said to the Bodhisattva with a smile, "Bodhisattva, please return the souls of the 3 girls. Although I'm overseeing the East Sea, I have a few close friends of the Buddhist League, such as Buddha Phutu, who is my closest friend through life and death." With a flip of his palm, Wu Qi pulled out the string of golden beads he had robbed from Buddha Phutu. "Look," he said to the Bodhisattva with a smile, "this is a gift from Buddha Phutu to me after I was conferred the title of King of East Sea." The string of golden beads was a Buddhist treasure personally crafted by Amitabha for Buddha Phutu. As soon as Wu Qi took it out, auspicious clouds swept across thousands of miles, and a torrential Buddhist light illuminated the sky. Even the surging water of the yellow spring suddenly became as clear as a mirror. The other bodhisattvas and arhats all turned to look at Ksitigarbha of the 6 paths, but the bodhisattva just glanced at the Lord Buddha with a mocking smile on his lips. He shook his head and said, "You're mistaken, benefactor. One thing is another, and 2 things should not be confused. What I'm discussing with you is the great sin of trespassing on the pure land of the Buddhist League. Even if you know a few juniors of the Buddhist League, it can't wash away your great sin." Upon hearing that, Wu Qi's mind was as clear as a mirror. Calling Buddha Phutu a junior? This Ksitigarbha sure has guts. Obviously, he and the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, are not the same kind of people, so there is no need for him to use these little tricks to deceive him. After shoving the beads back into his interstitial world, Wu Qi pointed at the bodhisattva and snapped, "Bald donkey, I'll ask you one last time, are you going to hand over the souls of the 3 girls or not? If you do, I'll turn around and leave right away." If you don't. The Bodhisattva sneered, rolled his eyes, and snapped, the Buddhist League is unlucky to have an unfilial disciple collude with an arrogant man like you. Somebody, activate the Six Paths mandala formation and help me release these villains from purgatory. After pondering for a moment, the Bodhisattva went straight to the point and said, that string of beads is the supreme treasure of the Buddhist League. How can we let it fall into the hands of outsiders? Quickly kill these villains and welcome the string of Buddhist treasures back to the Buddhist League. Ao Buzan was so angry that he cursed, bald donkey, if you want to kill and rob, just say it. Why do you have to make it sound so nice? With a clang, Ao Buzan pulled out his custom-made machete. The Bodhisattva's expression remained unchanged as he said with a faint smile, nonsense, evildoer. I'm just eliminating the evil and defending the Tao. Six Paths mandala formation, arise. As the Bodhisattva gave a loud cry, a great sheet of light suddenly rushed out of the huge light wheel of the Six Paths of reincarnation in the distance. The mountains under the feet of the Bodhisattvas and Arhats trembled, while dozens of giant beasts slowly broke out of the mountains and soared into the sky, slowly merging into the light wheel. A formation shaped like a mandala flower trapped Wu Qi and his companions in it. Then, the Bodhisattva flew up into the sky with the other Bodhisattvas and Arhats, occupying all the vital points of the formation. Before Wu Qi and his companions could say a word, flowers condensed from the Buddhist League's flame of purification fell like raindrops. A terrible heat swept over and burned Xiang Yu's long hair into ashes. Without giving Wu Qi and the others any chance to speak, Wu Qi was shocked to see that these disciples of the Buddhist League were so overbearing and strong. Chapter 843. The Mandala of the Six Paths. Wu Qi laughed harshly and said, what kind of formation can hurt me? With a backhand slap, a beam of light enveloped Xiang Yu. As Wu Qi was provoking Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, his long hair burst into flames like Xiang Yu's and was burned to ashes with a sizzling sound. The flames scorched Wu Qi's scalp and made it crackle. The severe pain made Wu Qi cry out in pain. Looking in horror at the Bodhisattva who had occupied all the vital points of the mandala flower-shaped formation, Wu Qi knocked Xiang Yu out with a palm strike and threw him into the dark Yin celestial tower hovering over his head. The chaotic energy in the tower rolled up Xiang Yu, and he was thrown into Wu Qi's interstitial world. Throwing his head back and roaring, Wu Qi's body surged with dragon aura. His height soared to about 10,000 feet, and his muscular arms, which were densely covered with dragon scales, smashed down at the void. Large amounts of transparent ripples appeared in front of his fists. It was a sign that the void could not withstand Wu Qi's terrible power and was about to crack. But, the Bodhisattva in the mandala formation chanted the name of Buddha in unison. Beams of Buddha light poured down, and the void, which was about to shatter, suddenly calmed down. Wu Qi's two punches, which contained infinite power, were like stones thrown into the sea, only causing a slight ripple and no longer having any effect. This is... Wu Qi sneered. Looking at Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, he said, fusing your Buddhist kingdom with the formation and controlling time and space with your own Buddhist Dharma is indeed a good trick. But, how many punches can a mere Buddhist kingdom withstand from me? The flame surrounded Wu Qi, Ao Buzan, and Catfish, burning the auspicious light rippling over their bodies and producing muffled crackling noises. The flame had a strange power, which could constantly weaken the magic power and spirit of Wu Qi and the others. Even their divine souls in their spiritual oceans could sense the dreadful temperature of the flame. Wu Qi was still fine, but Ao Buzan and Catfish Flood Dragon were frowning because of the burning pain in their divine souls. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha looked at Wu Qi with a calm expression and said with a disapproving smile, my Buddhist kingdom naturally cannot withstand a few punches from your highness. However, there are 800 bodhisattvas of Buddhism here, and each of them has condensed 3,000 Buddhist kingdoms. All the Buddhist kingdoms have been fused into one through the Six Paths mandala formation. Your Highness, can you destroy more than 1,000,000 Buddhist kingdoms with a single punch? Wu Qi was stunned. 800 bodhisattvas, and each bodhisattva had condensed 3,000 Buddhist countries. This group of evildoers was worthy of being people who didn't even give face to the current Lord Buddha. Some of the present Buddhas in the Buddhist kingdoms had only condensed 3 to 5 Buddhist countries, but each of these bodhisattvas had condensed 3,000 Buddhist countries. They were indeed the almighty experts of the Buddhist League who had served the Lord Buddha 100 generations ago, the Lord Buddha Vairocana. Their foundation was much stronger than that of the present Buddhas. There were a total of 2.4 million Buddhist kingdoms. Wu Qi could not help but feel his head buzzing when he calculated the number. Quantitative change could produce qualitative change. Wu Qi might be able to easily shatter 2.4 million individual Buddhist countries with a single punch, but when so many Buddhist countries were fused into one through the formation, Wu Qi was not confident that he could do it. Moreover, the formation did not just fuse the Buddhist countries of these bodhisattvas into one. In the yellow spring, the huge 6 paths of reincarnation emitted a black and white light that illuminated the sky, and the 6 paths mandala formation was also filled with black and white light. Countless Vajra wheels of the Buddhist League were wheeling rapidly around Wu Qi. Every time these Vajra wheels spun, Wu Qi and his companions felt the magic power in their bodies vibrate violently. Each wheel was like a small black hole, emitting a great suction force to absorb the magic power of Wu Qi and his companions, slowly wearing them down. The formation has also fused with some of the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Wu Qi frowned as he looked at Bodhisattva Kittagarbha. Kittagarbha locked his hands into a lion's seal and said slowly, "Your Excellency is indeed very smart. I've been guarding this place for countless eons. Although I can't become a Buddha because of my oath, I've mastered 30% of the mysteries of the heavenly Tao of the 6 paths of reincarnation. I've fused these mysteries into the 6 paths mandala formation. Unless Your Excellency has the mighty ability to break the reincarnation, you can't get out of this formation." The bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League all laughed. Each of them grinned, revealing 2 rows of white or golden front teeth. The power to break the reincarnation. Only existences in the realm of Tao reasoning could have the power to break the reincarnation. Below this realm, even someone as strong as Kittagarbha could only use a part of the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation, and he dared not say that he could destroy it. After all, the 6 paths of reincarnation was derived from the first wisp of innate reincarnation aura, which contained the mysteries of the heavenly Tao and the great power that ordinary people could not compare with. Wu Qi stared fixedly at Bodhisattva Kittagarbha. The pure fire burning on his body made his muscles ache. This kind of fire was not recorded even in the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture. It should be some kind of Buddhist flame that Bodhisattva Kittagarbha had comprehended himself. It had an extremely high temperature, a wonderful power that attacked both the fleshly body and the divine soul, and could constantly wear down the blood essence and magic power inside the body. All these attributes made this Buddhist flame extremely overbearing, even more so than several kinds of innate divine flames. The innate divine flame only had the word pure in it. Any kind of innate divine flame was extremely pure and contained extremely mysterious magic power. The Buddhist flame in the 6 paths of mandala formation, on the other hand, had the essence of overbearing, and its lethality was extremely amazing. Bodhisattva Kittagarbha looked at Wu Qi and laughed. He nodded and said, "Your Highness, there is another way out. I happen to lack an alms bowl holding Buddha by my side. If Your Highness is willing to condescend, I'll open the formation and let you out right now." Alms bowl holding Buddha was, to put it bluntly, a servant of the Buddhist League. His status was only slightly higher than that of the sweeping monks at the mountain gate. He was a little acolyte who followed the monks around with alms bowls in his hands when they went out for a stroll. By asking Wu Qi to be his alms bowl holding Buddha, Bodhisattva Kittagarbha was not only overbearing, but also a little insulting. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that Wu Qi was the king of East Sea of Dayu was enough to make him someone whom the Buddhist League could not afford to offend at will. Wu Qi had already announced his name, but he was still treated like this by Bodhisattva Kittagarbha. It could only be said that this bodhisattva had been dealing with ghosts in the nether world for too long, so much so that his way of dealing with people had become a little twisted. With a cold snort, Wu Qi shook his arms, and the flame on his body, which was as sticky as molten glass, turned into countless thumb-sized fire beads that shot out in all directions. Wu Qi unleashed all his aura. The terrible spiritual pressure of a primordial immortal roared out, and the rapidly spinning wheels of the Buddhist League around him exploded one after another. Countless beams of black and white light turned into specks of drifting flame and were sucked back into the huge 6 paths of transmigration. With just a shake of his arms, the 6 paths mandala formation rumbled, and the void where the formation was located was forcibly pulled out of the netherworld by Wu Qi. It was as if a mandala flower had been pulled out of a whole piece of glass. The space where the formation was located was surrounded by a vast amount of starlight, while the starlight ejected from the dark-green celestial tower condensed into countless stars and enveloped the formation. He had constructed a formation with all the stars in the universe, wrapping the entire 6 paths mandala formation in it. Ao Buzan gave a strange laugh as he waved the knife in his hand. A stream of dragon aura that was as sticky as ink rushed out of his body and rose hundreds of miles into the air like a volcanic eruption. Similarly, he unleashed all his aura as a 9th-tier primordial immortal. He did not bother to use the divine ability of dragons to summon wind and rain, but simply slashed at the 3 bodhisattvas above him with brute force. Catfish's move was even more straightforward. She did not even bother to release her aura. Instead, she pulled out her great hammer, gritted her teeth, and smashed it down with all her might at the heads of a dozen bodhisattvas standing on a mandala stamen. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha's expression was very interesting. He looked like a weasel stealing a chicken, who had suddenly turned into a phoenix, a fiendish phoenix contaminated by fiend energy. Even though he had practiced the Buddhist cultivation technique for so many eons and had a rock-like state of mind, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha was frightened by Wu Qi and his companions. Tao reasoning almighty experts, he cried out in a shrill voice. 3 Tao reasoning experts. The wheel of 6 paths of reincarnation in the distance trembled violently. 100 miles long beam of starlight burst out of Wu Qi's eyes, which crushed the stars that enveloped the 6 paths mandala formation. The crystal-clear formation that looked like a mandala flower shattered on the spot, turning into a rain of light that drifted in the air. Countless cracks appeared on the lotus thrones under the feet of the 800 bodhisattvas, and for a moment, the Buddhist kingdoms in their palms were severely damaged. Ao Buzan slashed out with his long knife and cut 3 bodhisattvas in half at the waist. Catfish's hammer fell, and the brains of 18 bodhisattvas splattered everywhere. Wu Qi gave a cold snort. The starlight suddenly transformed into countless handleless machetes and shot toward the bodhisattvas. You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. If you don't hand over the souls of the 3 bodhisattvas, I'll slaughter the netherworld branch of the Buddhist League today. Seeing that Wu Qi was about to kill all the bodhisattvas with the machetes, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha suddenly sighed. He and the other bodhisattvas, including those who were cut in half by Ao Buzan and those whose heads were smashed by Catfish, all returned to the sky above the mountain range. A vast amount of sticky yellow water soared up into the sky from the yellow spring, transforming into a great wave that came sweeping towards Wu Qi. Even with Wu Qi's cultivation base, he could feel his divine soul trembling when the yellow water wave hit the curved blade, and a vast evil aura rushed straight into his spiritual ocean. It scared him so much that he quickly used the divine flame of order to protect his divine soul, preventing the evil aura from invading his divine soul. The surging yellow water rushed up to the mountain range where Bodhisattva Kitagarbha was. The golden bodies of the bodhisattvas wounded by Ao Buzan and Catfish were rapidly absorbing the water. Their broken bodies were healed, and their smashed heads were regenerated. Wu Qi was taken aback, while Ao Buzan shouted, "Nonsense! The Buddhist League uses the water of the yellow spring to heal their wounds? How? How is that possible?" Wu Qi was stunned for a long while, and then he suddenly stared at these bodhisattvas with his eyes wide open. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base, unless the opponent's overall strength was more than 10,000 times stronger than him, he could see through almost all falsehoods with this pair of eyes. As he turned to look at Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, the world in front of him suddenly changed. Wu Qi could not help but suck in a cold breath. Are these still the bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League? In the vision of the chaotic divine eyes, he saw that the bodies of all 800 bodhisattvas were dark golden in color. They were wrapped in the water of the yellow spring, and from time to time, dense black smoke seeped out of their bodies. Under their feet were not lotus thrones that looked like white jade, but red lotuses condensed from the fire of retribution. The light hanging behind these bodhisattvas was not the golden light of virtue of the Buddhist League, but the light of evil karma abandoned by the heavenly Tao. Among the 800 bodhisattvas in front of him, even if he killed any one of them, he would get more than 100 times more virtue than killing the sovereign. How much evil karma had they created? Chapter 844. Buddhas and bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League, with the exception of those low-ranking arhats, who did not receive very good treatment, but when they went out for a walk, they would shine with a golden light and be covered with auspicious clouds, and the golden light of virtues behind their heads would be so dazzling that it could blind the eyes of those who looked at it. Because they possessed great virtues, they could blend with the heavenly Tao and not be violently rebounded by it. The cultivators of the Buddhist League focused on cultivating the mind and epiphany, so they attached the most importance to the accumulation of virtues. Wu Qi had once seen many supreme oracles in Liangzhu set up a trap and kill Prabhudaratna Buddha with one strike. But Prabhudaratna Buddha possessed great virtues, so when those supreme oracles killed him, the heavenly Tao did not bestow any virtues upon him. Unlike the sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance, the virtues bestowed upon him by Wu Qi and his companions after they killed him had greatly benefited Wu Qi, Gao, and Yugu. But Bodhisattva Kitagarbha and the other bodhisattvas and arhats not only did not have any virtues with them, but were surrounded by monstrous karmic fire, and their feet were burned by red lotuses of karmic fire. Towering black smoke filled the air, and their golden bodies of the Buddhist League had turned into fiendish bodies of karmic fire. In the vision of Wu Qi's chaotic divine eyes, he could see that they were not eminent monks of the Buddhist League, but a group of evil fiends who were not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. If it were not for the fact that this was the nether world, where Kitagarbha and the other 800 bodhisattvas and arhats had concealed their auras with the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation, they would have long been punished by the heavenly Tao and wiped out all traces of them. Compared with the Buddhas and bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League today, Kitagarbha and the other 800 bodhisattvas and arhats were truly different. With his chaotic divine eyes fixed on these bizarre Buddhist League cultivators, Wu Qi's divine soul slowly emanated wisps of primordial and chaotic aura. His divine soul tried its best to approach the vast heavenly Tao, and a wisp of divine will had already touched the unpredictable torrent of the heavenly Tao. With both hands locked into an incantation gesture, Wu Qi used the star divination technique he inherited from Su Qin to calculate why Kitagarbha and the others had become like this. With his current cultivation base of an 8th-tier primordial immortal, it did not take too much effort for Wu Qi to calculate the karmic entanglement of these bodhisattvas and arhats, who were only gold immortals. Wu Qi's eyes lit up and he understood everything. He couldn't help but sneer, "Sure enough, you're the one who brought this upon yourself." In the world created by the great Saint Pangu, the Buddhist sects were under much more pressure from the heavenly Tao than the Tao sections. The immortals of the Tao sect also paid attention to the harmony of dragons and tigers, and the balance of yin and yang. Those immortals would even marry and give birth to children, which more or less followed the principle of endless reproduction of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, although the immortals also did not accept the heavenly Tao, after all, they also followed part of the heavenly Tao, and the pressure they suffered was much less than that of the Buddhist sections. The Buddhist sects, on the other hand, only focused on their own cultivation base, and strived to cultivate themselves into an indestructible, bright, and indelible Vajra relic. Although the Buddhist sects had the art of dual cultivation, it was only a cultivation technique. When had anyone ever seen the Buddhas who practiced the art of dual cultivation produce offspring? Therefore, the cultivation technique of the Buddhist sects could be regarded as the ultimate art of cutting off offspring. The pressure the heavenly Tao exerted on the Buddhist cultivators was far greater than on the Tao sect cultivators. Therefore, since the emergence of the primitive era and the Buddhist sects, the Tao sect had been prosperous while the Buddhist sects had declined. In order to change the embarrassing situation that the Buddhist sects had always been inferior to the Tao sect, and sometimes could not even suppress the immortals of the Fiend League, the Ghost League, and the Demon League, 100 generations ago, the Lord Buddha, Vairocana Buddha, sent his number 1 disciple, who was also the number 1 bodhisattva of the Buddhist League, Kitagarbha Bodhisattva, to lead a group of Buddhist elites into the netherworld and gradually erode the 6 paths of reincarnation with the mystic arts of the Buddhist League. From then on, the Buddhist League was able to control a part of the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. If a Buddhist cultivator died, as long as a trace of his true spirit remained, he could forget his past and continue to cultivate in the Buddhist League after reincarnation. In this way, the Buddhist League was like a rolling snowball. Its strength would only increase, but it would not weaken too much. After dozens of eons, the effect of this move had gradually manifested. The power of the Buddhist League became stronger and stronger, and gradually had the momentum to suppress the fiend realm, the ghost realm, the demon realm, and the other realms, gradually catching up with the power of the Tao sect. However, during an apocalypse of heaven and earth, the leader of the Buddhist League's resurgence, the great Vairocana Buddha, died. Apart from leaving behind a golden body of an ancient Buddha, his soul entered the transmigration and began to cultivate again as a mortal. The new Lord Buddha also saw the importance of the 6 paths of reincarnation to the Buddhist League, so he was ready to intervene in the affairs of the 6 paths of reincarnation. But, how loyal was Bodhisattva Kittagarbha to the great Vairocana Buddha? If the great Vairocana Buddha was completely destroyed, he would naturally be willing to obey the decree of the new Lord Buddha. But now, the great Vairocana Buddha had fled into the transmigration. Although even Kittagarbha could not find the reincarnation of the great Vairocana Buddha, with his strong foundation, he would certainly be able to re-enter the Buddhist League and achieve the golden body of a Buddha in a few years. Under such circumstances, how could Kittagarbha obey the decree of the new Lord Buddha? As a result, the netherworld branch of the Buddhist League, which was represented by Kittagarbha, split from the main branch of the Buddhist League. Except for some necessary business connections, the netherworld branch of the Buddhist League did not have any connection with the Buddhist League. Naturally, the enormous virtues of the mortal world did not benefit Kittagarbha and his companions. Kittagarbha had led so many bodhisattvas and arhats to guard the 6 paths of reincarnation, and they had been constantly rescuing the believers of the Buddhist League from the Yellow Spring, freeing them from the suffering of transmigration. This was a complete violation of the law of the heavenly Tao of the 6 paths of reincarnation. For every person saved, the karma would increase. For every person saved, all the karma of that person would be attached to Kittagarbha and the other bodhisattvas. It was not a big deal for 30 to 50,000 years, as Kittagarbha and the other bodhisattvas could gradually eliminate the karma by relying on their own cultivation base. But over the years, since the birth of the great Vairocana Buddha, the Buddhist League had changed 100 Lord Buddha, and each Lord Buddha had been in charge of the Buddhist League for 3 to 5 eons at least, and 7 to 800 eons at most. How many people had Kittagarbha and his companions rescued from the Yellow Spring during such a long period of time? How many people had they saved from the suffering of transmigration? How much karma had they accumulated, and how much hatred did the heavenly Tao have for them? However, Kittagarbha was stubborn. He only recognized the great Vairocana Buddha. The current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, had personally visited him 9 times to persuade him to temporarily submit to him. But every time, Amitabha was scolded and driven out of the nether world by Kittagarbha. With his relationship with the main branch of Buddhism, it was obvious that he had no fate with the enormous amount of merit in the mortal world. Therefore, these pitch-black bodhisattvas appeared in front of Wu Qi, emanating monstrous evil karma. The natal relics of these bodhisattvas had been soaked by the karma, and such a strong and violent karma had even become an extremely powerful divine ability for them. If an ordinary Buddha was contaminated by the karma of these bodhisattvas, his golden body would be contaminated, and his divine soul would be burned to ashes by the red lotus karmic fire. After releasing the incantation gesture, Wu Qi looked at the 800 bodhisattvas in the distance, who had regrouped and regained their full combat strength, and said with a sneer, "So you are also a bunch of unlucky fools. What? If the great Vairocana Buddha did not show up, would you have been living with this golden body condensed of karma?" Kittagarbha's expression flickered slightly. Looking at Wu Qi, he said with a sneer, "You are indeed a primordial expert. I can't believe you have figured out our background in such a short time. But so what if you know the truth about us? Over the years, our divine souls have fused with the 6 paths of reincarnation, and our golden bodies have fused with the yellow spring of the netherworld. Unless the 6 paths of reincarnation are broken and the yellow spring dries up, you can't destroy our divine souls or our golden bodies. With a wave of his hands, two heavenly king fiend-slaying swords condensed entirely from the red lotus karmic fire appeared in his hands. "No one can hurt us in the nether world," Kitagarbha said indifferently to Wu Qi. "Not even the current Lord Buddha has the ability to hurt us in the nether world. Don't you think it's ridiculous that 3 low-grade primordial immortals want to suppress the nether world branch of the Buddhist League?" As Kitagarbha laughed, the 800 bodhisattvas removed the illusions and revealed their true forms. Standing on the red lotuses of fire, 800 black bodhisattvas, each 100 miles tall and shrouded in towering black smoke and boundless red karmic fire, slowly approached Wu Qi with divine weapons condensed from red lotus karmic fire. Ao Buzan and Catfish were startled by the sudden appearance of the 800 bodhisattvas. They had never seen bodhisattvas like this. The 108,000 arhats chanted the name of Buddha as well, and monstrous karmic fire spewed out of their bodies as well. One by one, they transformed into black bodhisattvas that were tens of miles tall, each holding a staff of the Buddhist League as they roared and approached Wu Qi and his companions. As these bodhisattvas and arhats moved, hundreds of millions of yakshas rose into the sky from the yellow spring ocean down below, treading on the waves. The males were ferocious and ugly, but the females were enchanting and beautiful. Each of them had a small black swastika between their eyebrows, emitting a faint light. These hundreds of millions of yakshas were the guardians of the yellow spring that Kitagarbha and his companions had subdued with the Buddhist League over the years. The 800 bodhisattvas surrounded Wu Qi and his companions in the middle, and they had reformed the 6 paths Mandara formation. On the periphery were 108,000 arhats, who had also formed a larger 6 paths Mandara formation. Even further on the periphery were countless yakshas. Under the command of thousands of yaksha kings who were hundreds of miles tall, they were running around on the waves, forming an indescribably large 6 paths Mandara formation. Kitagarbha gave a loud cry and charged at Wu Qi and his companions alone. Then, the 3 formations inside and outside were activated at the same time, and the boundless power of reincarnation came crushing over from all directions like a millstone. Wu Qi and his companions felt their bodies sink, and even their breathing became stagnant. "If you don't surrender, then have a taste of the infinite reincarnation of the netherworld branch of the Buddhist League," Kitagarbha cried out. "The 6 paths of reincarnation and all worlds retroactive grand magic, activate." As he roared, the bizarre power of reincarnation invaded the bodies of Wu Qi, Ao Buzan, and Catfish uncontrollably, frantically tearing at their divine souls, trying to extract something from them. Before long, Catfish's body suddenly stiffened, and her eyes burst into a great plume of gray light. She was completely controlled by the infinite reincarnation. Wu Qi and Ao Buzan also stiffened, and gray light also burst out of their eyes. Kitagarbha roared with laughter, waved the 2 swords condensed from the fire of retribution, and brought them down toward Wu Qi's neck. "Even though you are a primordial immortal, you will die here today." Chapter 845. The hammer in Catfish Flood Dragon's hand fell powerlessly, sinking all the way into the deep yellow spring ocean. As the sledgehammer fell, a few unlucky yakshas happened to block its path due to the change in the formation. Accompanied by mournful howls, these unlucky yakshas were smashed into minced meat by the sledgehammer and fell down along with it. A gray light burst out of Catfish Flood Dragon's eyes, and amidst the light was a gray tiger, curled up on the top of a mountain and yawning lazily. Before long, the light and shadow changed again, and the tiger was caught up into the sky by an extraordinarily handsome black eagle. The eagle's hard and sharp beak pierced into the tiger's head, lifting the top of its skull. Then, a muffled grunt rang out, and a series of inch-deep wounds appeared on Catfish Flood Dragon's back, from which blood kept flowing out. Judging by the look of the wounds, they looked like they were scratched by some fierce birds like eagles or eagles. Then, a very long wound suddenly cracked open on Catfish Flood Dragon's scalp, and a large piece of her scalp was nearly lifted off. Blood poured down from the wound and dyed her body a purple-gold color. The image in the gray light changed again, and a great serpent coiled on the top of a tree appeared in the light. The serpent was triumphantly spitting out a green inner core, about the size of a rice bucket, into the sky. A faint light was swirling around the inner core, and its poisonous aura was causing the surrounding trees to wither rapidly. All of a sudden, a thundercloud appeared high up in the sky, and dozens of tiny lightning bolts struck down from the sky. The python's inner den was smashed into pieces, and half of its body was burnt to a crisp by the lightning fire. Catfish Flood Dragon gave another muffled grunt, and a stream of purple-gold blood sprayed out of her mouth. Suddenly, thunderbolts rushed out of the upper half of her body, and a large patch of her skin was burned black like charcoal. The power of the thunderbolts was not very strong, and Catfish Flood Dragon's body was very resistant to all kinds of thunder magic at the moment. Therefore, only her skin was burned black, and the injury she suffered was not serious. However, the gray light flashed again, and this time, a horned dragon emerged from within the gray light. This pitch-black horned dragon was tied up by tens of golden chains on a blood-stained, ancient-styled stone platform, which was decorated with patterns of countless aquatic creatures. A tens of meters tall, golden-armored divine being stood beside the cage, wielding his axe and chopping off the horned dragon's head. Amidst the gray light, the dragon head flew up into the air and blood splattered in all directions, while a clear line of blood appeared on Catfish Flood Dragon's neck. A large amount of blood turned into a thin curtain of blood and shot out in all directions, producing rustling noises that sounded like the wind blowing through the woods. The bloodline went half an inch deep into Catfish Flood Dragon's neck and circled around her neck. If it had gone any deeper, her neck bones would have been cut off, and that would be a fatal injury. This was the power of the infinite reincarnation formation. Using the mutated evil Buddhist power as a primer, it mobilized the power of the great Tao of the six paths of reincarnation, forcibly recalling the most tragic scenes of the trapped person's previous incarnations, and then transferring the injuries to the body of this incarnation to kill the enemy. This was a truly heaven-defying means, and it was not tolerated by the great Tao. As the infinite reincarnation formation operated, the bad karma of Bodhisattva Kitagarbha and the others grew denser. But Kitagarbha did not mind it at all. As the saying went, when one had too many debts, one would not worry about them. Their bad karma was already so strong, so what if they added a little more? As long as they did not leave the nether world, with the protection of the six paths of reincarnation, even the great Tao could not do anything to them. In the nether world, with the power of the six paths of reincarnation, Kitagarbha and the others had nothing to fear. Even the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, had suffered several setbacks in the infinite reincarnation formation, so Kitagarbha was confident that he could definitely kill Wu Qi and his companions this time. The swords condensed of the fire of retribution were less than 3 feet away from Wu Qi's neck. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha looked complacently at Catfish Flood Dragon, who was severely wounded, and at the tragic scenes of her dying moments that kept appearing in the gray light screen. Catfish Flood Dragon's body was already covered with wounds, many of which almost pierced through her and tore her to pieces. A primordial immortal was nothing more than this. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha burst out laughing. As long as he had not reached the realm of Tao breaking, how could a mere Tao reasoning expert resist the power of the great Tao of the six paths of reincarnation? This was the great Tao, the power of the laws of heaven and earth. Even Amitabha, a first-tier primordial immortal, could not withstand the power of the great Tao of the six paths of reincarnation, let alone 3 lower-tier primordial immortals. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, who was laughing aloud, opened his eyes and looked curiously at Xiang Ao through the gray light that shot out of his eyes. He was curious about what strange creatures were in Ao Buzan's reincarnation, and he wanted to see how Ao Buzan would be devoured alive by the infinite reincarnation formation. As soon as he looked over, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha shuddered and almost threw away the 2 swords in his hands. There was only a chaotic void in the gray light that shot out of Ao Buzan's eyes. In the boundless chaotic world, a black dragon, hundreds of millions of miles long and indescribably huge, was lying on the body of a huge creature who threw its head back and roared, happily carrying on the business of carrying on the family line. The gigantic creature that was being raped looked like an extremely beautiful woman, but she had 6 golden wings on her back. Gentle golden light was released from the wings, breaking open a huge bright golden space in the chaotic world around her. The black dragon had 18 pairs of horns and 9 pairs of claws, each of which had 9 claws. Shaking his head, he grabbed the beautiful woman's hands and feet, then wrapped his long body around her, firmly suppressing her in midair. He did whatever he wanted, causing the surrounding void to tremble. The woman's eyes grew wider and wider. At last, she gritted her teeth, and a beam of golden light shot out of the center of her brows. Then, her whole body exploded. Caught off guard, the black dragon was also blown to pieces by the self-detonation of the woman. With the explosion, Aobusen's skin cracked, and he was covered in blood. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and Aobusen howled in pain. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha had no time to kill Wuqi. Staring at the scene coming out of Aobusen's eyes, he snapped, "This guy is actually the reincarnation of Arko Zulong, who was born in the primordial world. Good heavens, this guy is the ancestor of all dragons in the world." Even with Kitagarbha's cultivation base, he was so frightened that he cried out, "Good heavens." This showed how terrifying the identity of Arko Zulong was. The light in Aobusen's eyes flickered, and the next moment, a fat black dragon appeared in the light screen. It had 4 claws, each with 9 claws. Judging by its appearance, it was a direct descendant of the bloodline of the divine dragons, which had the highest status among all dragons. The black dragon sneaked to a hot spring that was spewing boundless heat and shrunk its body into the size of a small loach. Before long, a beautiful silver-haired woman came to the hot spring, accompanied by many gods and divine beasts. After those gods and divine beasts searched every corner of the surroundings, the silver-haired woman drove them away, took off her clothes, and entered the hot spring with a smile on her face. The black dragon hiding in the hot spring leaped up and threw himself on the silver-haired woman with a strange laugh. The previous scene replayed. The black dragon was on top of the woman, his body heaving up and down desperately. The woman screamed, and countless gods and divine beasts in the surroundings rushed over in panic. The next scene that appeared was that the black dragon was tied to a cyan metal platform. An old man in a white imperial robe gritted his teeth and personally chopped the black dragon into pieces with a bone knife. Then, he used its spine to forge a storage ring and sealed its soul in it. Countless fine arrows of blood sprayed out of Aobusen's body. His muscles cracked piece by piece, but soon healed. A terrible pressure that made one's heart palpitate slowly spread out of Aobusen's body, and his turbid and lifeless eyes suddenly shone with a bright light. A shrill dragon roar rang out as Aobusen flew up and punched the dumbfounded Bodhisattva Kitagarbha in the chest, sending him flying tens of thousands of miles away. Aobusen laughed strangely and said, "Lao Tzu knew Lao Tzu's lineage was noble and extraordinary. I can't believe Lao Tzu is the reincarnation of Arko Zulong. Ha 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 ha, so those little loaches are the offspring of Lao Tzu. Damn it, even those old elders of the dragons have to call Lao Tzu patriarch now. Excellent, excellent. Bald donkeys, Lao Tzu will kill all of you today as a token of his gratitude." Aobusen's skin regenerated rapidly, and dark scales kept emerging from under it. With a lascivious look in his eyes, Aobusen quickly glanced at the 800 bodhisattvas around him and suddenly growled, "Why are they all male bodhisattvas? Not even a single female bodhisattva. Are you still human? Not even a single female bodhisattva. How is Lao Tzu going to celebrate the recovery of Lao Tzu's memory of his previous life? You. Well, quickly transform into a few female bodhisattvas." The faces of the surrounding bodhisattvas turned livid. Kitagarbha, who was knocked flying away, coughed up a mouthful of blood and cried out in a hoarse voice, "Activate the formation with all your strength and kill this evil dragon." Damn it, how could he be the reincarnation of Arko Zulong? How could he be the reincarnation of Arko Zulong? Just as Aobusen was roaring and Kitagarbha was howling, something strange happened in Wuqi's place. In the gray light screen, a thin old man in a green Taoist robe, sitting cross-legged in the chaos, slowly appeared. The old man suddenly took a step forward and came to a continent that was still in a primordial state. He walked slowly on the continent, picking all kinds of rare innate spirit herbs. One day, when he passed by a spirit mountain, he happened to encounter a small white mouse with a pair of wings on its back. It was secretly eating a spirit herb, but it was tightly entangled by a crimson poisonous snake. With a wave of his hand, the old man killed the viper, then took out a spirit pill and fed it to the white mouse with a smile. The muddle-headed white mouse's injuries were healed, and with the help of the pill, it gradually developed a trace of intelligence in the future. Then, light and shadow flickered, and the old man clashed with dozens of hazy figures in front of an unusually magnificent palace. Those figures waved their hands at the same time, causing the void to collapse. The old man was smashed to pieces by the joint attack of these people, and his soul was gone. Only a tiny particle of his soul escaped into the transmigration, plunging into the endless cycle of transmigration. Seeing this, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha was so angry that he coughed up blood. He slapped himself hard in the face. Wu Qi closed his muddle-headed eyes, and when he opened them again, there was a very strange gleam in them. He nodded to Kitagarbha with a smile and said, "Thank you for awakening the memory of my previous life, fellow Taoist." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "Old man Yuanling? This Taoist name seems to be a minor character. No wonder he was killed by those people." With a strange laugh, a vast and unpredictable primordial aura as vast and unpredictable as that of Ao Buzan slowly drifted out of Wu Qi's body. Chapter 846. Wu Qi raised his eyes slightly and glanced at these bodhisattvas and arhats. He sneered and said, "You're just a bunch of ants who haven't even stepped into the realm of Tao reasoning. How dare you attack me? Wait, no, how dare you attack me? Don't let your previous life's personality affect this life." The few elders who created the cultivation techniques and laid the foundation of the Buddhist League were all chaos fiend gods. Before long, Kitagarbha also felt the change in his body. He hissed angrily, pointed at Ao Buzan, and howled, "You're the mighty Arko Zu Long. How can your divine ability be so despicable and shameless? Alas! I can't believe I'm such a person." Wu Qi murmured in a low voice, "Interesting, interesting. It's completely different from my current character. I'd better keep my current character. I'd better not inherit the character of an unlucky guy who was beaten to death by so many people. How wonderful. Old man Yuanling is actually proficient in the art of artifact refinement. The art of alchemy is also the best among chaos fiend gods. Ha, this is wonderful. It's a perfect match with the myriad harmonization grand magic. It's actually the heaven refining grand magic, which can refine everything in the world and obtain supreme treasures. Ha, I can't believe you can even use your own fleshly body as an artifact and finally reach the level of indestructibility." His aura was vast like a boundless ocean, ancient and filled with the unique primitive aura of the chaos. Kitagarbha had once sensed this aura from several secluded elders of the Buddhist League when he followed great Buddha Vairocana to visit them. The details were different, but the aura was the same. Using the myriad spirit cauldron as the foundation, the Wahuang clan, who transfused souls into human bodies, was also a chaos fiend god. With a flick of his sleeve, Wu Qi threw it at Kitagarbha again. The Yiksha's combat prowess collapsed in an instant, but the most miserable one was Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, who was spat out by Ao Buzan. The liquid Ao Buzan spat out sprayed all over Kitagarbha's face. Caught unprepared, he even swallowed a large amount of the black liquid. Kitagarbha turned pale with fright. He mobilized the true flame in his body to refine the black liquid, but as soon as the flame appeared, the black liquid immediately turned into a rich aroma that filled his internal organs. No matter how he burned it, he could not dispel it. Ao Buzan laughed strangely, then cried out triumphantly, "Despicable! If your mother wasn't a slut, how would she have you?" Ao Buzan, who had interpreted the word shameless and dirty to a level close to the realm of the heavenly Tao, laughed wildly. With a wave of his dragon claw, he went straight to Kitagarbha's crotch and cried out, "Watch Lao Tzu pick the peach." Wonderful. With a flick of his sleeve, a few faint threads of light outlined a mysterious rune on the cuff. The eyes of the 799 bodhisattvas and 108,000 arhats were suddenly thrown into confusion. Their bodies went limp, and they were all pulled into Wu Qi's sleeve. After taking away these bodhisattvas and arhats, Wu Qi smiled at Bodhisattva Kitagarbha and said, "Be good and come in as well." The black water he spat out was an extremely dirty divine ability he had comprehended in his previous life. If a male creature smelled the sweet aroma in the water, it would lose the ability to reproduce, and if a female creature smelled it, it would be aroused and would devote itself to the business of reproduction. There were 9 dragon claws under the dragon's abdomen, and each of them had 9 claws. Clearly, this was the true form of Arko Zu Long in his previous life. After the memory of his previous life was awakened by the infinite transmigration formation, Ao Buzan communicated with his previous life with a great divine ability. Although he could not restore the infinite divine ability of his previous life, he had pushed his fleshly body to a level no different from the perfect dragon body of his previous life in a flash. Well, I can retire the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the dragon transformation script now. The fleshly body of Yuan Ling can be ranked in the top 3 among all chaotic fiend gods, while Pangu's is only ranked 9th. Wonderful. With the heaven refining grand magic, I can use the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the dragon transformation script to fool others. Ao Buzan and Kitagarbha tangled together. Ao Buzan's mouth was full of obscenities, from Kitagarbha's ancestors to his impossible daughters and granddaughters. Ao Buzan cursed hundreds of generations of female members of Kitagarbha's clan. Kitagarbha just silently waved the water whip and fought with Ao Buzan. His hands kept changing incantation gestures, and beams of light kept flashing across his face, as if some seal in his body was gradually being unlocked. These Buddhist bodhisattvas had stayed in the netherworld for so many years. Their golden bodies were not only attacked by karma, but also assimilated by the evil and filthy water of the yellow spring. In the end, they simply refined their golden bodies and the water of the yellow spring into one, so that their fleshly bodies would not die until the yellow spring dried up. That was why Ao Buzan had cut 3 men in half and Catfish had smashed the heads of more than a dozen men, but they could recover immediately by absorbing some water from the yellow spring. The few legendary figures who established the foundation of the Tao League were chaos fiend gods. Billowing black water swept across heaven and earth. Apart from Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, the first to suffer were the countless yikshas of the yellow spring. With pale faces, the male yikshas reached out their hands to touch their nether regions. After smelling the subtle fragrance, their nether regions began to shrink rapidly and turn cold. Before long, their family jewels were as cold as ice. Kitagarbha's face turned blue with anger. Ignoring the bizarre changes in his body, he clenched his teeth, chanted the name of Buddha, and used the Buddhist divine ability to subdue demons to fight with Ao Buzan. With a sway of his body, Kitagarbha's body swelled to hundreds of miles tall and transformed into the Dharma idol with 6 heads and 18 arms. The boundless water of the yellow spring rolled up and turned into dozens of water whips that lashed at Ao Buzan. The great Saint Pangu, who had established the Pangu world and allowed so many living beings to thrive, was a chaos fiend god. Tisk, why are you so vengeful? Do you still remember your enemies from your previous life? Well, you and I are the same person. If I meet them, I'll definitely hurt them a few times, provided that I can defeat them. Yuan Ling's nether realm, the cave abode where he used to cultivate. I'll go there and have a look someday. The great Saint Pangu was also an almighty being born in the primordial chaos. Inspired by the heavenly Tao, he abandoned himself to create a new world in the primordial chaos for all living beings to live in. The Wawang clan owned the myriad spirit cauldron, from which the souls of all living beings in the world were produced. She possessed an immeasurable amount of virtues, and she was the one with the greatest virtues in the universe. As for the few old men behind the Tao League and the Buddhist League, they had existed since the chaos was created, and they had infinite power and magic power. After obtaining the memories of the divine abilities from his previous life, although Wu Qi's magic power had not been substantially improved, his attainment had reached an incredible level. With his current level of attainment, he could even destroy the bodhisattva in front of him with the power of a nascent soul cultivator, not to mention that he had the overall strength of an 8th-tier primordial immortal. Kitagarbha swallowed with difficulty. Having cultivated in the netherworld for countless years and seen many incredible things, when he suddenly sensed the aura emanating from Wu Qi, he could not help but have the impulse to turn around and flee, abandoning the foundation of the Buddhist League in the netherworld. Seeing Ao Buzan spit out the sinister thing called the sun-chopping yin-scorching dragon incense, Wu Qi hurriedly shielded himself and Catfish, then focused on watching the show. Over the course of countless eons, countless Chaos Fiend gods had fallen. Few people in this world remembered the name of Chaos Fiend God, and very few had the luck to deal with them. Even so, those who were aware of the might of the former Chaos Fiend deities would know that every single one of them possessed unimaginable power. They were not existences that present-day cultivators could hope to fight against. Wu Qi reacted very quickly. He waved a stream of chaotic energy to wrap himself and Catfish up, then turned to Ao Buzan and scolded him with a smile. Wu Qi was rapidly awakening the memories of his previous life, and countless information was pouring into his mind. He naturally knew what Ao Buzan was spitting out. In those days, Arko Zulong was notorious among the Chaos Fiend gods, and he had even caused thousands of male primordial fiend gods to besiege and annihilate Arko Zulong. In Wu Qi's previous life, Yuan Ling had also joined in the action. He had even secretly ripped dozens of dragon scales from Arko Zulong's body and refined them into an innate spirit artifact. Amidst their murmurs, the many bodhisattvas and arhats on the periphery roared and charged at Wu Qi. There was only one kind of existence who could have such an aura, an innate being born in the primordial chaos before the great Saint Pangu created the world, which was also the so-called Chaos Fiend gods by today's immortals, Buddhas, and many other living beings. But, before he could put his impulse to flee into action, Ao Buzan had already made a decision for him. With a deafening dragon roar, 1,000-mile-long, pitch-black, 9-clawed divine dragon wrapped in a thick black mist appeared in midair. With a twist of his body, he came in front of Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, opened his mouth, and sprayed out a stream of black water that came with a faint, slippery aroma. Even though in his previous life, Wu Qi was just an unlucky fellow who was attacked by dozens of Chaos Fiend gods and fell into the transmigration, and even though he only had the cultivation base of an 8th-tier primordial immortal now, as long as he had the divine abilities of his previous life and could use a little of his magic power, any Buddha or primordial immortal would be as weak as paper in front of him, and could not withstand even a light blow from him. The female Yakshas, on the other hand, had their eyes spitting fire as they pounced on the male Yakshas beside them, throwing them into the Yellow Springs Ocean without any regard for the consequences. For a moment, the outer formation of the infinite transmigration shattered with a boom, and the Yakshas were entangled in a mess. The male Yakshas roared and screamed in panic, while the female Yakshas let out a cry like a cat on a spring night, hugging the male Yakshas and refusing to let go. The primordial aura emanating from Wu Qi's body grew stronger and stronger, and his eyes grew brighter and deeper. Gradually, his eyeballs could no longer be seen in his eye sockets, leaving only two masses of dark mist that emanated a bizarre power that could suck away one's soul like black holes. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha's legs were trembling. At that moment, he really had the impulse to leave everything behind and flee. At this moment, Kitagarbha had unleashed the monstrous water of the Yellow Spring to fight Ao Buzan. Dozens of water whips larger than Ao Buzan swept across the sky, forcing Ao Buzan to dodge and not daring to touch the water. No matter how filthy and obscene Ao Buzan was, he did not dare to be careless in the face of the filthy and evil water of the Yellow Spring. Even though his dragon body was not afraid of the water, it was like a living man would not jump into a cesspool for no reason. It had nothing to do with his strength, but his obsession with cleanliness. Chapter 847. As he spread his sleeve, it was as if the whole world was enveloped by it. A few mysterious talismans outlined by silver threads flickered at the cuff, each of which seemed to contain the infinite mysteries of heaven and earth and the universe. A great suction force came from the sleeve, which was as dark as a black hole. With a sway of his body, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha was about to fly into the sleeve. Wu Qi had only used the immortal energy of a 36th-tier heaven immortal for this move. After inheriting the memories of his previous life, Wu Qi's cultivation base had reached an incredible and unpredictable level. Even though he had not mastered all the knowledge of his previous life, his cultivation base had broken through the realm of primordial immortals and reached the realm of Tao breaking, which was higher than the realm of primordial immortals. A person with a low cultivation base was like killing a person. A person with a low cultivation base was like a child. Even if they held a divine weapon, they would not be able to kill the enemy effectively. However, a person with a high cultivation base was like a well-trained killer. Even an embroidery needle could kill a person silently. At this moment, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha was the toddler, and Wuchi was the killer. With the immortal energy of a 36th-tier heaven immortal, he could still make Kitagarbha gasp for breath. With a flick of his sleeve, Wuchi said lightly, "The matter here is over. Let's send Yuji and the others into transmigration first." Before his voice had died away, a grey Buddhist light suddenly flashed across Kitagarbha's face. An obscure, profound, and unfathomable wave of Buddhist power surged out, knocking Wuchi's sleeve back and almost covering Wuchi's head. Kitagarbha put his palms together and cried out in a deep voice, "The Buddhist League is vast, and the sea of Dharma is boundless." As he roared, a series of muffled sounds of iron rings breaking rang out of his body, and a terrible Buddhist power, which made Wuchi and Ao Buzan pale at the same time, poured out of Kitagarbha's body. It was as if the banks of the Yellow River had burst, as if the Milky Way was flowing backwards, as if all the gods in the universe had gone mad. The Milky Way in the sky was torn apart, and the stars in the Milky Way came crashing down to the mortal world. The enormous and unbelievably long Buddhist power transformed into a lofty mountain and spread out in all directions. Before Wuchi, Ao Buzan, and Catfish Flood Dragon could react, they were all thrown away by the force. Wuchi was the first to bear the brunt of this magical power, and his body flew backward uncontrollably. The quality of this magical power was not very high. Even the essence of the magical power of a peak-level gold immortal could not hurt Wuchi. But the amount of this magical power was so great that it rolled up Wuchi and pushed him backward like a torrent. Wuchi tried to stabilize his body with 18 restrictive spells, but the grey magical power came whistling over. Wuchi was thrown tens of thousands of miles away in a whirl, unable to stop the momentum of his retreat. Ao Buzan gave a long roar. One of his dragon whiskers flew out and rolled up Catfish Flood Dragon, and then his huge body was thrown away by the magical power. His scales crackled as they slid swiftly like oars. Their sharp edges cut through the torrents of magical power around them, allowing Ao Buzan to swim freely in the violent turbulence. But, the magical power rushing out of Kitagarbha's body was too great. Even though Ao Buzan's scales had the power to break the magical power, he still could not control his body well. Kitagarbha put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice. His body had returned to its 60 feet long golden form, shrouded in the red lotus karmic fire. The flames shooting out of his eyes shot straight at Wuchi, burning Wuchi's body and causing him severe pain. The bright and clear flame of the Buddha burned Wuchi's skin and went straight into the depths of his skin. Although his skin and muscles were fine, wherever the flame passed, the vitality of Wuchi's skin was rapidly draining away. Soon, his skin became withered like ashes after the firewood had been burned out. Buddhist power, which was almost tangible, hovered around Kitagarbha, turning into 42 wheels of the Buddhist League that glowed with a grey light and kept spinning. As they spun, they produced a deep rumble that sounded like rumbling thunder. An enormous pressure swept out in all directions, suppressing Wuchi so much that he could not even circulate his magical power. Wuchi looked at Kitagarbha in horror. He was still a peak-level gold immortal with the cultivation base of a bodhisattva, and the essence of his magical power had not improved to the level that a Tao reasoning expert should have. If the essence of a Tao realm expert's magical power was a diamond, then the essence of a peak-level gold immortal's magical power was an ordinary lump of mud. When the soft and crisp mud collided with the diamond could easily break the mud and crush it. But when the number of mud reached an abnormal level, it was extremely difficult for a small diamond to break the mud. The essence of Kitagarbha's magical power was still that of a gold immortal, but the amount of his magical power was simply appalling. As an 8th-tier primordial immortal, Wuchi's total magical power was more than 100,000 times that of an ordinary peak-level gold immortal, but Kitagarbha's total magical power was millions of times more than Wuchi's. Compared with Kitagarbha, Wuchi's magical power was a stream, while Kitagarbha's was an ocean. He had an overwhelming advantage in magical power. A freak! Wuchi and Ao Buzan cried out in unison. Kitagarbha smiled and waved a hand with a calm expression, throwing a lotus flower condensed from the red lotus karmic fire at Wu Qi. A freak, he said coolly. I've been guarding the nether world for countless eons, but I can't become a Buddha because of my great wish. But I've been refining my magical power here, using the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation and the water of the yellow spring to temper my Buddhist power. My Buddhist power can be considered the strongest in the Buddhist League. Otherwise, why would I ignore Amitabha's decree? The red lotus came smashing down toward Wu Qi. Although it was only the size of a fist, it gave Wu Qi an irresistible feeling. Wu Qi waved his left hand. The innate energy of the 5 elements, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, on his fingers transformed into 5 beams of sword energy that shot out and hacked at the red lotus. The fragile red lotus shattered, but when it exploded, the red lotus karmic fire poured out of it. Wu Qi's left hand trembled, and then it was forcibly dislocated by the red lotus karmic fire. The endless red lotus karmic fire rushed toward Wu Qi, frightening him so much that he flashed to the top of Ao Buzan's head with an escape art. He dared not to fight with the red lotus karmic fire, which was powerful enough to drown him. Kitagarbha turned to look at Wu Qi and Ao Buzan. You'll stay here today, he said lightly. The Buddhist League is vast and mighty, and my almighty power is beyond your imagination. I can't believe you are all reincarnated chaos fiend gods. I'll capture you alive, send you into the transmigration, and squeeze out all the wisdom of your previous lives in your souls. Even if I don't become a Buddha, I'll have the power of the Buddha. With a strange laugh, Kitagarbha cried out, as long as I have the power of the Buddha and the mighty power of the strongest expert of the Buddhist League, who in the world can defeat me? Wu Qi looked coldly at Kitagarbha and said indifferently, what a fool. Your magic power is simply appalling. Even a Tao-breaking expert does not have such a terrible magic power. It's no wonder you have been guarding the nether world for countless eons. Unfortunately, even if you have such magic power, what's the use if you can't use it at all? Kitagarbha laughed confidently. Even Amitabha can't do anything to me, so what can you do? Wu Qi took a deep breath. For the first time, his chaotic energy began to circulate according to the cultivation technique of the heaven-refining grand magic. Accompanied by a mysterious immortal tune, a grey Wu Qi rushed out of the top of Wu Qi's head. A translucent 3-legged cauldron wrapped in a faint spirit light slowly emerged from the top of Wu Qi's head. Heaven-refining grand magic, there is nothing in the world that cannot be refined. Heaven-stealing grand magic, there is nothing in the world that cannot be stolen. Stealing and refining indeed complements each other, wonderful beyond words. Wu Qi had turned into 2 balls of pure black that kept spinning. A faint gleam shone in his deep eyes as his divine sense enveloped Kitagarbha. Suddenly, he crooked his finger and cried out, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, you are controlling your magic power with your Buddha heart cultivation base, aren't you? Buddha heart consciousness, return now. As he crooked his finger, Kitagarbha suddenly let out a miserable howl. A beam of spirit light shot out from between his brows and was swallowed by the 3-legged cauldron hovering over Wu Qi's head. Purple smoke rose from the cauldron and a strange aroma filled the air. Before long, a loud bell rang out, and a fist-sized, pure white pearl slowly flew out of the cauldron, giving off a faint aroma of ambergris. Wu Qi grabbed the pearl and threw it to Xiang Ao. Ao Buzan laughed wildly in both horror and joy, then swallowed the pearl. He looked at Wu Qi in a flattering manner and cried out, Master, you're amazing. I can't believe you can even refine this bald donkey's Buddha heart into a pill. All of a sudden, Ao Buzan screamed in horror, damn it. How can something like the Buddha heart be extracted? How is that possible? It's the source of the divine power that bald donkeys of the Buddhist League have cultivated for countless reincarnations. Amidst Ao Buzan's screams, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha also let out a strange cry of horror. He still remembered countless Buddhist scriptures, divine cultivation techniques, and mystic arts, but he suddenly forgot what they meant. It was like a scholar suddenly forgetting all his knowledge in front of the emperor in the great hall of the palace examination. He still remembered everything, and he could still recite all the scriptures backwards, but he had completely forgotten what they meant, and all the knowledge that extended from them. The 42 Buddhist wheels around Kitagarbha disintegrated with a boom. Although they were the magic power he had cultivated painstakingly, he could no longer control them now. They were right next to him, and he could sense their existence, but he had forgotten how to control them and how to use them to exert a terrible power that was comparable to that of a Buddha. Wu Qi burst out laughing and said in a low voice, "That's a good gain." He pointed a finger at the cauldron over his head. A loud rumbling noise rang out as the enormous magic power around Kitagarbha turned into a torrent and poured into the cauldron. Before long, all of Kitagarbha's magic power was absorbed by Wu Qi. Staring blankly at Wu Qi, Kitagarbha snapped, You're an evildoer." Wu Qi shrugged and said to Kitagarbha with a serious smile, "You're right, I also think I'm quite an evildoer now. The combination of the scripture of Tao and heaven refining grand magic is simply too monstrous. If I had the scroll of stealing in my previous life, how could I have fallen?" With a flick of his sleeve, Wu Qi put Kitagarbha into his sleeve, and then, with a flick of his finger, the mountains that stretched for millions of miles around the 6 paths of reincarnation collapsed with a boom, and all the Buddhist gardens on the mountains were turned to dust. As his finger streaked across the void, Wu Qi tore open the Buddhist kingdom in Kitagarbha's palm and took out the souls of the 3 women. Then, Wu Qi opened his mouth and spat out Xiangyu, who was in a daze.